How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final genocide. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final I don't wanna get married. I don't wanna be just like you. Nobody bothered to ask me. They said I ought to be just like you. Well, I could get a marriage license for a husband and me, so I could use the health insurance for my HART. Since I can file taxi with the same gender spouse, I shouldn't feel so bad getting kicked out of my house. Don't send me a rainbow. You want to never done shit for me. Don't want a seat at your table. A fucking invitation to your party. Wanna celebrate a game on your cable TV? Well, trans lesbians are calling southern bodies stuff to eat. You paid the world for CEOs for shotguns and dicks. Well, all the kids on the street are getting belted with whips. I don't wanna be equal, 'cause I know I'm fucking better than you. Moderation is lethal. Get on my way, let me do what I need to. That's the protection that this nation states can offer to me. Just all it brings is do this is my gay bourgeoisie. So fuck off with your rainbow South American flag. The only colors that I need are the pink and the black.
Welcome back, everyone, to Queer Marxism Month at the Cult. That is why we are watching that glorious video, because in that one music video, and that is a real music video, that is a real queer Marxist punk band. That's like queer Marxism in the wild. In that one video, you basically get queer Marxism encapsulated for you in a single glorious song. And the video is actually not that bad. If we're being honest about it, they hit on all the main points. And so you're going to be hearing that song a lot in the month of June, because other people might say it's Pride Month. I say it's Queer Marxism Month, because we are going to spend the month studying some of the craziest shit that you've ever seen in your life. And today is going to be no different. Now, I think I found a good one for today. I was reviewing the selection on YouTube, and I found this video from like a week and a half ago. It's audio only, but I think it's going to be worth it. It's called Eros and Empire, a Marxist theory of desire, queer liberation, and the limits of nation, with yada, yada, yada. Doesn't say. That's the end of the title. What does the description say? I gotta make it bigger so I can actually read it. I'm not wearing my glasses. What happens when queer liberation becomes entangled with the myths of the nation state? In this episode, we speak to Alexander Stoffel about his new book, Eros and Empire, which traces the transnational roots of sexual freedom movements in the US, from gay liberation to Black lesbian feminism to AIDS activism. I wonder if they're going to talk about ACT UP. Stouffer shows how desire has been both constrained and mobilized against imperial and capitalist systems. Oh, there's my favorite word. Together, we explore how a Marxist approach to desire can open new paths for solidarity beyond the boundaries of the bourgeois state. Now, I don't always trust new YouTube channels when I find them. So I was like, what's this video? And then I clicked onto their YouTube channel, and I started looking at some of their other selection. And guess what was the very first video that they streamed like less than 24 hours ago? Lacan. We almost watched the Lacan video just because the guy yesterday, the Tufts professor guy that was talking about, was it the death whatever with relation to queer? I even forget. He was talking about Lacan over and over and over again in that presentation, and I was like, is this a sign from God? We literally just watched that Tufts professor talk about Lacan like yesterday, and now all of a sudden I'm on this new queer channel, and it's got a video about Lacan in like the past 24 hours. I was like, that's a sign. But there's other good stuff on here too. Yep, they've got Butler. They've got all sorts of good stuff on here. They've got a whole video called Capitalism, the Transcendental Logic of Capitalism. We have to watch that. We have to watch that at some point. Look, Gnosticism. Guys, they've got a Gnosticism video. Mystical thought. Sadism, autism, and the Oedipus complex. Oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, we're going to watch that. Yeah, that's Freud. That's Freudian psychoanalysis. That's going to be great. Nothing's going to go wrong with that. I've got a whole video about Peter Thiel. Oh, what? Eroticism and the future of porn. Oh, God. Oh no, the future of fascism. There's so much gold on this channel. Is Hegel cool? Wow. Bruh. So what's this? Is he teaching in a classroom? Oh, looks like it's in Europe though. So then, just so you guys know, this channel is legit. I found their Twitter account. And what did I see? They've got 33,000 followers on Twitter, but most importantly to me, Sophie follows them. And so it literally, as soon as I saw that our queen Ginger Dragon followed this Twitter account, I was like, done. Done. We're doing this today. But can I tell you guys a secret for the people who are here early? Can I tell you guys a little secret? And then I've got some other stuff I want to talk about real quick before we get into the show. Don't tell anyone. But I also did some research on another topic. And I found what I think is going to end up being just one of the most satisfyingly crazy videos we've seen in a while. And I'm really excited about it. Yep, you are all in the cone of silence live on the internet. And I had already decided that we were going to watch this this Marxist theory of desire thing today. So I was like, this is going to have to wait until tomorrow. So do you guys want a preview of what we're going to watch tomorrow? Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, you should be. Yeah, you should be concerned. Yeah. So, you guys know, and you might even see it up in the tabs if you can read the small type. On occasion, I like to dabble in the freakishly odd world of fat studies. Because fat studies is just universally hilarious. There are entire zines dedicated to fat studies, and they're all porn. They're all porn. In fact, every single fat studies person I have ever looked into, and I've looked into my fair share, every single time we have watched a fat studies person, inevitably, they are also an amateur porn star. Every time. I have seen things that my eyes cannot unsee. And people want to call me fat on the internet. Oh, honey, I don't wear plus size clothes. No. No. You might think I'm fat. That's fine. I don't really care. We're not talking about my body type when it comes to these people. We're talking about someone who can't fit into an airplane seat. Okay? And listen, if you're a bigger person, I'm not judging you. I don't really care. But and it's not about whatever you look like. No one gets self-conscious or anything if you're carrying a little extra weight. I don't want anyone to feel bad. But it's not about them being fat. It's about them wearing their fat as an affirmative part of their identity in which the entire world is oppressing them because they are fat, and then flaunting their body in all sorts of cringe ways all over the internet and wearing clothes they really shouldn't be wearing and making fat porn and producing zines that are all fat porn. It's just like, it's a fucking insane world of fat studies. And if you've never seen fat studies before, you have to come tomorrow, because I was doing some research and I found what I think is going to be an excellent video for so many reasons. I'm going to tell you why. Don't tell anyone about this. We're doing it tomorrow. No one watch ahead. This is only for you. This is the cone of silence on the internet. No one watch this video until we get to it tomorrow, okay? We're going to do it together. And trust me, you're all going to want, you're going to want to do this with friends, okay? This is a presentation we are all going to suffer through. This is a very it's a masochistic exercise. We are going to inflict pain on each other, and it will be easier if you do that with friends. Well, not on each other. We're going to inflict pain on ourselves. We're going to strike that, reverse it. We're going to inflict pain on ourselves, and we'll do it with each other. So I was like, the first question is, okay, so this presentation is called Fat Liberation is Shared Liberation. And that would have been enough for me, okay? But then I was like, what is this radical public health thing? And so I clicked into the video to learn a little bit more about what it was. Let me read you the description of the video, because this just gets better and better and better. And again, we're doing this one tomorrow. We're not doing it today. We're doing the other one today. But let me just read you the description of this video. Radical public health at the University of Illinois, Chicago. What is this, you ask? Oh, I Googled it. The University of Illinois, Chicago has a student organization within their School of Public Health called Radical Public Health, an association of students, alumni, faculty, staff, and community members that seeks to address the systemic underlying causes of public health challenges and to consider more radical solutions. creates a forum and a supportive environment for a radical perspective at the University of Illinois Chicago, including within the School of Public Health community, enhances collaboration and builds solidarity with School of Public Health faculty and other people in the community, maintains an egalitarian communist internal structure that reflects our values, normalizes radical perspectives within learning, research, practice in the public health community. This is a publicly funded university. Let's just read a little bit more of this description. Radical Public Health at the University of Illinois Chicago is joined by panelists Autumn Miller, Dr. Monica, and Virgie for a discussion of the harms of anti-fatness, countering anti-fatness, and intersections of fat liberation, Black and brown liberation, colonialism, and abolition. Autumn is a scholar activist of fat studies, abolition, and racial capitalism, and is a PhD student in the gender studies program. We'll read the rest of that tomorrow. You get the idea. You get the idea. I'm giving you guys 24 hours advance warning, okay? Everyone needs to steel their mind to this. You need to prepare yourself for what we're going to watch tomorrow. It's a good thing. I usually don't give people 24 hours to prepare for a presentation, okay? In fact, I'm just going to make sure I have this downloaded just because I'm going to make sure I have it downloaded right now, just in case something happens to it between now and tomorrow. I don't want anyone to get tipped off and to take it off their YouTube channel. So I'm just going to make sure I download this presentation, have the file ready. Just in case someone emails them and says, did you know that Psycho is streaming your content? All right, that's starting to download. We'll check in on that later. So I want everyone to prepare yourselves. We're watching this tomorrow at 5 p.m. It's going to be awful, but it's also going to be great, and it's going to be amazing. And it will be a bonding exercise for our community, and we'll come out stronger and better for having endured the fat studies presentation. This is going to be so fucking good. Guys, you know I don't make guarantees often. But I promise you, this is going to be amazing. It's going to be special. It's going to be one of the best streams ever. That's going to be tomorrow at 5 p.m., guys. We are going to be watching something else today. But before we get into that, I do have a couple orders of business that I would like to talk about. And first, breaking news. Do you guys know how I was literally the first person on the internet to call out Santa Ono as soon as he announced that he was leaving the University of Michigan to go be the president at the University of Florida? Do you remember how I called out Santa Ono for not doing anything to stop DEI at the University of Michigan, literally a week before anyone else even caught on to who Santa Ono was? Because I knew who Santa Ono was, because I worked with Santa Ono when I was a consultant in higher education. I knew exactly who he was. I knew exactly what his game was. I knew exactly what was going on. I called him out first. And then Chris Rufo started screaming about it and pretending like it was his idea, even though Chris Rufo defended Santa Ono at first. And I said, what the hell, Chris? Of course, he never acknowledges it. Rufo works for a Zionist organization that fires amazing Black college professors like Glenn Lowry for interviewing the wrong people, while continuing to employ porn stars like Christina Buttons, pretending to be a journalist. Chris Rufo sadly works for the Zionist-funded Manhattan Institute and can't step a toe out of line and can't talk to me and can't acknowledge anything I say or do ever, even though I was a week ahead of him, Chris, and he fucking knows it too. I would be curious about what led Chris Rufo to speak up about this, to be honest with you, because I saw him speak out in favor of Santa Ono, and then all of a sudden he was against him when I was screaming about it and saying this is actually like not a good idea. But you know what? beggars can't be choosers. I should just be happy at the outcome, right? Santa Ono is not going to be the president at the University of Florida. And honestly, and I actually do mean this, I actually feel bad for the guy. I really kind of do. Santa Ono is not a bad person. He's not a woke leftist. He's really not. Again, like, I've talked to this man. I know who he is. He is not a bad person. He is just a guy that really wants to be president of universities in the most prestigious presidency that he can get. And he's been hopping around from university for years to try to get that more prestigious presidency. He's been president of like 4 or 5 different universities in the past 10 years. I met him over 10 years ago. So he's really kind of like pinged around. And what you do when you're in that position is you don't do shit. You get into that presidency, you don't piss anyone off. How you don't piss anyone off in higher education, I worked in higher education for 10 years, if people don't know. How you don't piss anyone off in higher education is you keep your mouth shut and you keep your head down and you change as little as possible and you don't piss off the faculty. Well, Santa Ono pissed off the faculty at the University of Michigan. That's why he was so keen to leave the University of Michigan in the first place and go to the University of Florida. The faculty hated him. They totally froze him out. They made his life miserable. He was all by himself. No one helped him, all this stuff. I know that because I know people at the University of Michigan. I've been hearing about this for a while. So I actually do feel bad that Santa Ono got caught up in this. He's going to be fine. He's going to get a presidency somewhere else. He's not a woke leftist is what I'm saying. I do actually believe that if he went to the University of Florida, he would do exactly the same thing as he's done at every other university, which is sit in the presidency and not change anything and not piss anyone off. He has a long track record of basically not doing much of anything other than going along with the flow, because that's the kind of guy he is. If he's at a woke university, he goes along with the flow. If he is at an anti-woke university, allegedly, he goes along with the flow. You know, it's kind of a sad thing. But you know how I responded to Chris Rufo? Yeah, this is true. A university president is basically a fundraiser. That is 100% true. The most important job of a university president is a fundraiser. That is what they do. It's like they don't run anything. They don't run the faculty. They don't even really have any power over the faculty, to be honest with you. It's actually I would never want to be a university president. Heff that. Honestly, it's such a precarious position. And again, I worked in higher education. I used to literally advise college presidents at all different types of colleges all over the country. And I would never, ever, ever want their job. Never. You could not pay me enough. You could pay me $1 billion and I wouldn't care. It is such a precarious job to be in. It's so stressful. The hours are really long. The demands are really severe. You get to be the university president. That's all fine, well, and good. You get to have fancy outfit. You get to wear a medal. You get to be in all these ceremonies and all that stuff. You get the prestige of it. But it is a really shitty job and I would never want to do it. So I responded to Chris Rufo and I said, hey, Chris, I think this is really great and all, but when are we going to get a comment from you on the fact that the New College of Florida bought 250 copies of Judith Butler's gender studies book and gave it out to people for free? And if you guys want to respond to this post under Chris Rufo's announcement that he got the incoming University of Florida president fired, if you guys just want to respond to this post and like this post and heart this post to drive this post up in his replies, everyone who has a Twitter account, go to respond to this saying, Chris, we would like a statement from you on why the New College of Florida bought 250 copies of Judith Butler's gender studies book. Wordsmith it however you like. Don't all say the same thing or anything. I'm just saying that everyone with a Twitter account, go to respond to that, go retweet that, go heart that. Because to be frank, and listen, Rufo needs to account for this. I'm tired of this politician bullshit. The New College of Florida is supposed to be an anti-woke college. Christopher Rufo, who has been campaigning and was literally successful with getting Santa Ono fired from a job he hadn't even started yet. And listen, again, I'm not on Santa Ono's side. I called him out a week before Rufo did. I said this guy did not stop DEI in Michigan. 2 days after I called Santa Ono out, Chris Rufo said, oh, look, Santa Ono says he stopped DEI in Michigan. And then all of a sudden, like a week later, Chris Rufo backtracks and goes to the other side and starts saying, hey, guys, something's wrong. And I was like, bro, I said this a week and a half ago. Where the fuck were you? So I'm not on Santa Ono's side here. I'm really not. I'm actually more on Rufo's side than I am on Santa Ono's side. However, Christopher Rufo is on the board of trustees at the New College of Florida. He was put on the board of trustees by Ron DeSantis. Like 7 months ago, the New College of Florida made this big PR campaign about getting rid of all their DEI books on campus. They brought in a giant dumpster. They put all the DEI books in the giant dumpster. They took some pictures. They put them on social media. Everyone was like, the New College of Florida is woke free. And that was all fine, well, and good. I was a fan. I'm a fan of a lot of the things that Rufo's done at the New College of Florida, which is why we were all a little surprised when we found out, what was it, a couple months ago, that Judith Butler gave a talk at the New College of Florida. And we watched the talk on this channel that Judith Butler gave, and it wasn't good. It was not good. Judith Butler got no pushback in that talk. You can go back and watch the archive if you want. Judith Butler got no pushback in that talk. She was able to shill her crazy ideas. The guy moderating it was basically like, Judith, you are so amazing, and you are so stunning, and you are so brave, and you are so incredible, Judith. And aren't you amazing, Judith? And Judith, we just love you here. Judith Butler is one of the godmothers of queer theory, okay? Judith Butler is the godparent of queer theory. She is the person that invented gender performativity. Gave a whole talk about gender studies at the supposed anti-woke college in Florida. Gave a whole spiel about why the New College of Florida really just should bring back their gender studies program. And Judith even said, she was even like, the whole reason I did this talk in the first place was to make the argument that you guys should reinstitute gender studies, okay? Got no pushback, no challenge from anyone. So we watched that full talk on this channel. You can go back and find the archive. And then, wouldn't you know it, a couple weeks later, we were watching another Judith Butler talk. And in that second Judith Butler talk, and this talk took place at Haymarket House in Chicago. Haymarket House is a radical leftist event venue. It's owned by Haymarket Books, which is a socialist book publishing company, the largest socialist book publishing company in the country. And Judith went to Haymarket House to give a little talk. And just in case people forgot, I'm going to play this clip. I'm not making this up. I'm not the one who said this on the internet. Here's what Judith Butler said.
I mean, I'm trying to make a little bit of a joke because, you know, it's such a grim time. Yeah. And I'm not just making fun of it, although one wants to make fun of it. It's very powerful. It's affecting so many people's lives. It's unbelievable. Healthcare, education, books that are banned. I mean, I actually went to Florida and hung out at the new school the new college, sorry, new school's better. The new college where they had banned the gender books, thrown them out, thrown them into a trash bin and dismantled the gender studies program. And, but the bookstore at that place bought 250 copies of this book and handed it out to everybody who came to. Yeah. Right?
I won't play the rest of the clip because I'm basically going to say exactly what I said in the rest of that clip. Excuse me, what? Not only did the supposed anti-woke college, the New College of Florida, bring Judith Butler to campus for a talk in which she got no pushback at all. And by the way, when that talk happened, Chris Rufo retweeted someone that said, I just went to this amazing talk by Judith Butler. And Rufo said something like, I heard this was a really great talk. I'm sorry, what? So that was shocking enough. And then to hear Judith Butler, well, she's at a socialist venue. This is a socialist venue. Giving a talk to a room of revolutionary socialists. She says, oh yeah, I went to the New College of Florida and they bought 250 copies of my gender studies book to give out to students for free if they came to my talk. Now, is this the biggest deal in the world? No, probably not. Probably not. Life goes on. But it does show a lack of principle, and it shows a lack of intellectual integrity. And I've been trying to get an answer out of Rufo for this question for a while, and he is being a politician, and he's ignoring the question. He's ignoring it entirely. He's pretending it's not there because I am not relevant in the land of Chris Rufo. He is hobnobbing with people in the White House, darling. Who cares if someone on the internet finds Judith Butler saying that the new College of Florida is blatantly going back on its pledge to be anti-woke? That troublesome girl on the internet who just fights too much with people and, you know, is probably anti-Semitic because she doesn't support Israel, because of course that's what they say. Even though I don't care if people are Jewish. But it's not enough in Chris Rufo's world for people to not be anti-Semitic. Being anti-Semitic is not enough. You have to be anti-Semitic in Chris Rufo's world in order to get anything acknowledged. So, because Rufo continues to ignore this, I would like to rain on his parade a little bit by boosting this clip up in the replies of his announcement of getting the new president of Florida fired. I think that that's worth it. And so as a reminder, if you are on Twitter, please make sure, go like the tweet, go reply to the tweet, go tag Rufo in it. Everyone on Twitter do that. You're sitting here watching the stream. You can do two things at once, okay? Go boost that up in his replies. And he's probably going to continue to ignore it, and that's fine. He can continue to ignore it, but I'm going to make damn well sure he sees it. I'm going to make damn well sure it comes up in his notifications. And he can continue to pretend and pretend and pretend. And someday when Chris Rufo decides to run for office, because that is obviously and clearly the direction that he's been going in for a while, someday when Chris Rufo decides to run for office, we have a record of all the times like this that Chris Rufo said one thing on Twitter and then did another. Wouldn't it be a shame if Chris Rufo tried to become the president of a university and then it was pointed out that the university he was on the board of trustees at literally bought 250 copies of Judith Butler's gender studies book to give it out to students for free? That would suck. I wonder how many other instances like this there are. I wonder what else is going on at the new College of Florida, because the new College of Florida doesn't really seem to be anti-woke anymore. I haven't investigated the new College of Florida in a while, but... And listen, I don't actually particularly want to ruin Rufo's career ambitions or his political ambitions or anything like that. I actually really don't. I think Chris Rufo being a politician would probably be more net positive than negative. But the point is he should fucking comment on it and he should fix the fucking problem. Because this is a problem to me. This is a problem to me. It is a problem if Chris Rufo is going around calling out everyone else for doing stuff, but he's not addressing his own house. He's not taking care of his own business. So I would like an answer, and what I would really like him to say is, yeah, I don't know why that happened, but I'm going to look into it and I'm going to fire the person that did that. That would honestly, honest to God, listen, man, Rufo's on the board of trustees at this college. I don't expect Chris Rufo to be approving every single decision that's made on campus. But what I do expect is some acknowledgement that this is a fucking problem. And for him to say, yeah, I'm going to make sure the person who did that gets fired. Just like he just got Santa Ono fired at the University of Florida. Because it's not as though the staff at the new College of Florida doesn't know what the deal is by now. They should all damn well know what the deal is. He's had long enough. This should not be happening. And I want answers. And I'm going to keep being a pain in the ass until I get those answers. And that's just going to be the way it is. And if he doesn't like it, I don't really care. It is what it is. All right, moving on to my next thing that I want to talk about before we get into our video today. I gotta complain for a second. James Lindsay's audience is the stupidest audience on the internet. Can I just show you guys this real quick? This is just like... So, this guy, Rod, whose last name I don't know how to pronounce. It's no disrespect. I just don't know how to pronounce it. I'm just going to call him Rod. I actually like Rod. Rod writes for the American Conservative. Rod has covered my work a couple times before when no one else did. Rod was one of the only people to cover autistic sex education, so he can say things I disagree with on the internet, and I don't really care. You want to know why? Because he was one of the few people to cover the stories that actually mattered. So Rod, sadly, made the mistake of taking James Lindsay's side when it came to the whole woke right question. And I guess he went on a podcast with Barry Weiss or something where he took James Lindsay's side and was talking about how the woke right is a problem. And so James was celebrating this all day yesterday. This is actually hilarious. James was celebrating this, he's like, yes, I'm back. Everyone agrees with me. And he was like promoting this article all over the place. And then apparently someone called Rod and was like, Rod, did you know X, Y, B, and Z? And then Rod retracted his support for the woke right, which was hilarious. He says, this is nuts. Yoram Hazony is not remotely woke right, nor is national conservatism. The idea that any deviation from classical liberalism is woke not only distorts what wokeness is, but smears nationalist, localist conservatism with the neo-Marxist racism of the woke left. Yes, it does, Rod! Yes, it does. And so I was like, yeah, he figured it out. He figured out what Lindsay means. LG, if you want to know what autistic sex education is, it's literally on the top of my YouTube channel. So it's the whole playlist. You can find the original stream and all that. It's a stream we did about 2.5 years ago. It's crazy. But you got to go watch the replay. It's right on the top of the YouTube channel, like the homepage. So I'm not going to go into too much on this one, other than to say that I started responding to people in his replies because I did. Because James Lindsay's supporters came into his replies after he denounced James and his woke right bullshit. James Lindsay's supporters started descending into his replies. You're falling into the trap of lesser minds by saying any deviation from classical liberalism is considered woke. That's not what James is saying. I think if you look into what he's saying, you'll see that. James is actually saying explicitly that, by the way. He actually does. And I responded to him, and into this person, I said, James explicitly said that on trigonometry. He did. I covered it. We watched the entire trigonometry interview. From start to finish. James explicitly said that this was about classical liberalism. James has explicitly posted memes where he called conservatives abnormal, just like socialists. I've covered this on the channel. So I said that. I was like, James has actually said that. Well, I've never seen it. Are you going to give me a link? And I said, literally his most recent interview on the show, Trigonometry. You can find it yourself. Listen, I was laying in bed this morning when I was tweeting this. I'm like, I'm not going to go search for a YouTube video for someone else. That bitch can find it on her own. And so she says, oh, I get it. You aren't going to give me a link. So this is a James Lindsay supporter who can't go to YouTube and find an episode of Trigonometry with an interview with James, which you would think she would want, but she is incapable of going to YouTube and finding this on her own. So I was like, nah, I'm not doing your research for you. And then she laughed. And then this person, Tyler, they ignore what he's actually saying, tell you he's saying something else, and then refuse to show you where he said it. Literally similar to how the woke left operates. Weird. And then this stupid bitch who can't search YouTube said, I noticed that too. And then, so Tyler also responded. I also responded to Tyler separately. And I said, she doesn't even listen to him. Reality, she spent almost 5 hours listening to and breaking down his stupid MAGA Civil War podcast. And I provided a link to the most recent episode we did about James, which was 5 hours long. Now, did Tyler actually see the link? Because he said, When I said, oh, you guys really can't do this research, can you? He says, she just keeps talking. Can you believe she just keeps talking? You are making the claim, therefore the burden of proof is on you. And I said, I literally just provided you with evidence. There's a link in the post. I literally just gave you evidence. Now you have to go listen to the whole thing. Otherwise, you're not listening to anything I say. And then I reposted it again just to make sure he had the link that I provided him. What did he say? So this guy literally starts this thread saying, they ignore what James Lindsay says. They don't even listen to what James Lindsay says. It's so woke to not listen to what someone says. And then he demands that I show proof that I've listened to what James has said. And then I showed him explicitly the video where we watched exactly what James says for 5 hours. And he says, I have to watch 5 hours of content so that you can avoid answering a simple question. Got it, wokey. So this is the current state of James Lindsay's audience, guys. This is the current state of what we're dealing with. James Lindsay's audience. People never listen to James. I just don't know why people don't listen to everything that James says. Literally me. I've spent dozens of hours listening to James. Here's a link to the most recent episode where I listened to James for 5 hours. James's audience. I'm not listening to all that. Like, this is what we're dealing with. James's audience are the stupidest people on the internet. And although it's really funny, it's also very sad. It's just, they're so dumb and they don't realize how dumb they are. It's like, it's so wrong. It's so wrong. So I had to show you guys that. I had to show you that. But before we get into our show, and I know I'm running a little long here, I had a lot of stuff to say, but I want to give you guys a feel-good moment before we go into queer insanity. Are you guys ready for a feel-good moment? We're going to do one feel-good moment, and then we're going to watch Queer Marxism for the rest of this stream, okay? So I saw this video today. I saw this video getting shared around. And as soon as I saw the video, my instant reaction was, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. This is going to be bad. This is going to be like a non-binary person doing something cringe. This is going to be bad. And then I watched the video and it was actually pretty great. And so I just want to watch the video. It's like less than 2 minutes long. And you guys can watch it too. And the sound is on. It was so unexpectedly great. Just watch.
I was misgendered yesterday. A little girl at the mall, she was maybe 5 years old, sitting in a wagon, kept staring at me. So I made eye contact, and she said, "Are you a girl or a boy?" Her mom started to go, "Oh my God, we accept everyone. That's so rude. You can't say that." And I laughed, and I bent down on her level, and I said, "That's okay. It's confusing sometimes. I'm a girl. I just really like boys' clothes. They're pretty comfy." She got all excited and she said, "I'm a girl too." And I gave her a high five. I said, "Isn't it so great being a girl? I love being a girl." She said, "Yeah, that's my brother. He's a brother because he's a boy." So I said, "You're right. Brothers are boys and sisters are girls. There's only boys and girls. If you're born a girl, you're a girl. I was born a girl." I can almost see the release of air coming from her mother's body and just the ultimate sigh of relief that I wasn't going to be indoctrinating her child or teaching her child something that maybe she didn't want her to know. I continued to talk to the little girl about her brother and her very cute dog, who was also a girl. I said, "I hope you have a great day," and I went about my business. That is how you address gender to children. You don't. That is how you empower little girls and let them know that it's okay to be a girl who dresses however you want without having to change your gender. That is how you avoid confusing children, especially children that aren't your own, and projecting your bullshit on them because you might be offended that they use the wrong pronoun.
I can't clap harder for this video. It was so great. It was so great. It was so unexpected. It's like, I don't know if this woman's a lesbian or she gives off butch lesbian vibes. I hope she's not offended if I say she's a butch lesbian, but like sometimes you just need a butch lesbian to like intervene and be like, okay, like stop. And if she's not a butch lesbian, who the fuck cares? Because she said there are boys and girls and there are two, and I'm a girl, you a girl, we can both be girls. I can wear a boy's t-shirts and still be a girl, and that's all right. And you don't have to wear boys' t-shirts, or you could and you would still be a girl, because that doesn't change. It's like, this is like the absolute perfect message that we need during Queer Marxism Month / Pride Month. Because, of course, one of the goals of queer Marxism is to abolish the gender binary. It's to get rid of the concepts of men and women. They try to confuse people. They try to confuse kids, especially, to believe that gender is a spectrum and you can feel one way and another way, and changing your gender is easy as changing an outfit and all that stuff. And then you got the very masculine woman who likes men's clothes coming in and saying, hey, I'm still a girl and you're a girl, and that's not going to change, and your brother is a boy, and that's all right. It's like, it's such a simplistic but perfect message in the most unexpected way. And I just like, I don't know who this woman is, but awesome. 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 Got a couple super chats. Been watching the Andrew Wilson versus male feminist debate the past couple of days. Even when Karlyn was a Dem, she understood male feminists are the worst. Yeah, it's true. I did. Thanks, Naruto. I am always right, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Guys, we are going to get into our main show. If you just showed up or showed up a little late, we're going to be watching a queer Marxist podcast called, we're going to be listening to. It's an audio only. So we're going to be listening. We're going to put on our best listening hats today. It is what it is. Marxist Theory of Desire, Queer Liberations, and the Limits of the Nation. As a reminder, if you want to support the work I'm doing, head over to my Substack. That is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Sign up for a membership, $8 a month, $80 a year. We just did a spy stream this morning. It was a great spy stream. You can catch the replay on demand. This is for supporters only. We also have another spy stream coming up on Thursday. So great time to sign up for a membership if you aren't one already. Spy streams are supporter exclusive. That's when we go inside live leftist trainings and we watch them together as a group and we talk about them and we document them and record them. And they're not always happy when we record them. And sometimes you see the news be made right in front of you, which is kind of cool. You can catch the replay of the teacher activist training we watched literally earlier today over on the Substack. It was a really great show. And we got another one coming up on Thursday. It's going to be awesome. Also, as a reminder, I just released another book in honor of Pride Month. I wrote a satire based on Alice in Wonderland, except it's called Alice in Queerland. It is available in paperback and on Kindle, now on Amazon. If you have already read it, because I know some of you actually already read it, it's a really short book. It's very, very short, but I think it's pretty good. I'm really proud of it. I had a ton of fun writing it. It is a dystopian, dark, satirical reimagining of the Lewis Carroll classic, and I think you're really going to like it, especially if you liked my fairy tale book, my Communist Manifesto fairy tale book. You're going to love this. Make sure you're leaving reviews for the books on Amazon if you love them. 5 stars only. I appreciate it. And of course, purchase of my books or memberships on my website. Do go to support the work I'm doing and help keep me independent so that I can create all this great content for you, which I really enjoy doing. All right, let's get into our show. Hang on. Guys, please make sure you mount the like button for me if you have not already. I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We do Socialism Saturdays on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Let me get up my fancy. There we go. Look at that. Fancy, fancy. All right, guys. We are listening to A Marxist Theory of Desire and Queer Liberation. And let's get this party started.
Hey everyone, it's Craig from Acid Horizon again, and I'm imagining by this point in the year, many of you have either ended your semester or perhaps graduated, and congratulations if that is the case. And now is the time to kick back and do a little bit of your own reading. And if you haven't sorted out what your reading projects look like for the summer, we have 2 new offerings. We have Will's course on The Philosopher and the Friend. It's a reading group that just started actually yesterday as I'm recording this, and so there is certainly time to hop in. In fact, each one of the essays that is approached in that reading group can be read basically as a one-off. Our Pierre Klasovsky reading group also just concluded Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle, and we spoke with the ghost of Klasovsky yesterday in the reading group, and we have decided to continue. So what I have done is I set up a reading group for just 3 months.
Why isn't it giving me the
in which we are
controls?
going to look
Okay,
at
well, whatever.
Klasovsky's very famous essay, Living Currency, and some secondary pieces that are going to...
I don't care. Start the show.
I have hacked my...
Don't care. Not listening to this whole intro. Sorry.
Joining us. Hasn't Alexander Storm within the
Pop in.
Okay, here's the start.
Show notes in case that's something that interests you, and it should. Today on the show, we have Alexander Stoffel, and we're talking about his book, Eros and Empire. It's a conversation about a Marxist theory of desire, queer liberation, and the limits of the nation. Let's pop in.
Welcome to Acid Horizon, the Theory podcast. Today, many of our struggles, and there are a lot of them, tend to have a certain disposition towards international politics. How do we move from the particular local struggles to the universal? How do we link struggles together in order to tackle the global crises which encompass us all? And indeed, given that I'm currently speaking in English from London, and Craig is of course based over in the States, how do we do this in an act of transnational and international solidarity from within the imperial core itself? Now, we are lucky to have Alexander Stoffel with us to discuss his latest book, Eros and Empire, The Transnational Struggle for Sexual Freedom in the United States, out now with Stanford University Press. And we're going to be talking about the history of gay liberation, black lesbian, AIDS survivor and activist movements, and how, in many ways, the history of these movements hasn't fully comprehended the idea that these were transnational linkages of struggles, and part of a lineage that we even see today in groups like, for example, Queers for Palestine. And I'm just really interested in getting into this history and this theory with you all today. Alex, thank you for joining us.
Queers for...
Living Currency.
Oh, come on.
And some
What
second...
the fuck? Hang on. YouTube has done something weird. It's not giving me the control panel. Okay. I just want the control
now with Stanford University Press, and we're going to be talking about the history of gay liberation, black lesbian, AIDS survivor and activist movements, and how, in many ways, the history of these movements hasn't fully comprehended the idea that these were transnational linkages of struggles, and part of a lineage that we even see today.
So I was trying to pause to say transnational struggles means like Queers for Palestine in this case.
Groups like, for example, Queers for Palestine. And I'm just really interested in getting into this history and this theory with you all today. Alex, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to this. I love the podcast.
Thank you for listening. I mean, just to kick it off, I mean, so this book it articulates a Marxist theory of desire, and particularly in the context of the United States. So I guess it's a kind of broader but still very much theory-focused question before we get into the history proper. What does it mean to take a Marxist approach to the question of desire? No.
LG, you need to go back and watch Saturday's episode of Socialism Saturday. Queers for Palestine is absolutely not chickens for KFC. That is what we call a bullshit conservative talking point. It is unhinged from reality. It shows no understanding of what the left believes. Please. You're getting to a point where you're starting to be around the channel long enough to know not to bring conservative bullshit talking points into my chat. Okay? Well, okay, so you got it. What does Queers for Palestine mean then? What do you think Queers for Palestine means? Because you just said got it. So I'm going to assume that you understand the critique that I'm giving. So can you explain to me what Queers for Palestine means? What do you gut? Okay, fair enough. Saying is going to watch the video. Let me give you a quick overview. Queers are fighting for the annihilation of capitalism. Palestinians view Israel as the embodiment of capitalism. They are in solidarity against the oppressor that is capitalism. And I've explained these things when you've been around before. I know that I have. So I would recommend going and watching the Socialism Saturday from this past week. And please, 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 no more conservative bullshit talking points in my chat. Queers for Palestine means the comrades in solidarity with the Palestinian socialist uprising. Liberating Palestine from the oppression of Israel, Israel being the settler colonist, that means the capitalist. The Palestinians in this model are the proletariat, the oppressed, the people who are decolonizing the land. Queers are in solidarity with them because they're all in the same oppressive struggle against capitalism. That is what Queers for Palestine means. Bobby, this is actually a really great way to put it. Anti-capitalist for Palestine. That's exactly right. All right, let's keep going. Hopefully it doesn't mess up again. Don't do this to me, YouTube. Come on.
Particularly in the context of the United States as a national project, as a nation-building project with its own repressive history when it comes to the desires of the people who live in it.
What a Marxist approach to desire looks like is a really tricky question. I actually think that there hasn't been much systematic Marxist theorizing about desire. I know it's always controversial to say that something hasn't been properly written about, so I hope I haven't triggered listeners just 30 seconds into the episode. I mean, there certainly is much written about desire by Frankfurt School critical theorists and by French post-war philosophers and psychoanalysts and queer scholars and affect theorists, all who have varying relationships to Marxism. But strictly speaking, I wouldn't say that we have a Marxist theory of desire. And that may be for a good reason. I would be very skeptical, actually, of the notion that we can derive any one theory of desire from an analysis of capital, at least not at the level of abstraction from which Marx proceeds in Capital. Marx actually himself says as much. So in Volume 1, he's very clear that the specificity of human wants and needs and desires actually make no difference to his project. His project being to determine the fundamental laws or logic of capital as such.
Capital
so his
means
point is that
private
under
property.
capitalism, commodities will appear as material bearers of exchange value, regardless of the specific wants or desires of any one individual. People don't really have a choice but to conform to the law of value, regardless of what they think or how they feel. And by the way, this is how I think we should also be thinking about gender and sexuality as well.
Oh, yeah?
That we can't logically derive all the various dimensions of sexuality, including sexual desires, from that level, from that very abstract level of analysis either. I think it's important to challenge the idea that capitalism needs any one particular configuration of gender, sexuality, desire, the family, as though capital had uniform needs that it went around imposing throughout society. So what can we say
Interesting.
at the highest level of abstraction? Well, we can say that the generalization of commodity production and exchange under capitalism requires the existence of a commodity that is the source of value. And we know that that commodity is, of course, labor power. And that for labor power to be available on the market, there needs to be a class of people who we call proletarians, who are cut off from the means of production and who are deprived from the possibility of reproducing themselves outside of the market. And some of those proletarians, not all of them, but some of them will become wage workers and will have to rely on their wages to reproduce their own lives and to reproduce the lives of their dependents. And so we all need to find out how to organize our survival and how to organize our reproduction when we're not working. Some of our reproductive activities can be commodified and marketized, and some of them have been, but most of the activities that keep us alive.
Why is he... Fuck! I did it again.
Welcome
I did it again.
to Acid Horizon, the Theory podcast.
I
Up
fucking
here.
hate this bug that YouTube has. It took away I was looking for the pause button, and it took away my control panel to find the pause button. The question I was going to ask is, why? I don't even know where I left off. Okay, it's not there. Why is he talking so much about social reproduction theory? Like, why is he saying over and over and over the problem of reproduction, or like you're reproducing your experience? Social reproduction theory is something we talked about a lot. It just means social systems will reproduce themselves until they're disrupted. But he's using it as in like reproducing elements of your life, which I find a little confusing, but maybe he'll let us know. I have to remember to click in the middle because some weird bug. Click.
Outside of the wage relation.
Dang.
The traditional nuclear family model, the one that gives us our most sort of traditional rigid ideas of binary gender and heterosexual desire, is really just one way of organizing the reproduction of our lives. But it's certainly not the only one. In fact, there are many different forms that this could take. So all of this is, of course, not to say that we can't have a Marxist approach to desire, gender, sexuality. Of course we can. I think when it comes to desire, the question for Marxists is, how are our human desires shaped by the unfulfilled needs that capitalist society creates? But that question takes us to a much more concrete level of analysis. It takes us to, and here it depends what you want to call it. You can call it a particular conjuncture or social formation or a stage of capitalism or a regime of capital accumulation. But we need to move to a more historically situated context. So you're right to ask about what a Marxist approach to desire looks like in the context of, for example, the United States as a nation building project. I think at that level, there are things that can be said about desire. So the way that I'm thinking about desire in my book is in relation to the US and its bourgeois state form. So the United States has a bourgeois character, which is just to say that it's defined by the establishment of the political as a distinct sphere. So there's a distinct political sphere.
What is bourgeois?
Where people appear as abstract citizens who are.
This bug is going to drive me crazy. What does bourgeois mean in this context? What does bourgeois actually mean? It's not just about being America has people in the political. That's not what bourgeois means. That's not what bourgeois means at all. What does bourgeois mean? The United States has bourgeois character. What does that mean? It's not elite class. That's not what it means. What does bourgeois private property mean? You guys aren't listening. What does bourgeois private property mean? The United States has you guys should know this. This is actually starting to piss me. No. I'm okay. I'm not seeing a single correct answer in the chat, which is disappointing because you should literally all know what this means. Not a single correct answer in the chat. The chat has gone retarded today. Nope, none of you. I need everyone to stop typing now. I need you to stop fucking typing. Stop. You just keep giving wrong answers and you're making me feel like I'm not teaching you anything because you are not listening to the question that I am asking you. When this person says the United States is bourgeois in character, what does that mean? Every single one of you that watches my content should know this. Literally every single one of you should know this. I talk about this all the time. Are you kidding me? Is this one of those days where I need to end the stream early to make a point about listening? Because now I feel like you guys not only are you not listening to the question I'm asking, you also aren't listening to the other streams you're watching. Aha! Kenneth. Finally, The United States is built on capitalism. Bourgeois means capitalism. It means the capitalist class. It means the oppressor class. They call the Constitution the bourgeois Constitution. They call the government the bourgeois government. That means the capitalist government, the capitalist Constitution. By the way, no. No. When I tell you you've got a wrong answer, don't give me that answer again. They literally call the Constitution the capitalist Constitution. No, you didn't say that. What is the difference between mercantile and what I actually asked you? Have you ever heard a socialist call the United States the mercantile government, the mercantile constitution, the mercantile society? Have you ever heard, do you have any clips of them ever doing that ever? If not, you didn't give the correct answer. Don't fucking whine when I tell you you're wrong. You take the correction and you learn, or you get the fuck out. I was right, even though you gave a completely fucking wrong answer. Like, who are you in the right place? You are in my classroom. I'm not in yours. You don't tell me you got a right answer when you didn't. Oh, you're laughing? You are? Oh yeah? Guess what? You just got put in a timeout for the rest of the stream. Hang on. Our new laughing friend, who I think was gifted a channel membership. I don't think they bought the channel membership on their own. I think they were gifted the channel membership. Just got put in a timeout for the rest of the stream. You're gonna laugh when I'm having a serious discussion. Then you will be silenced, and you can sit in the fucking corner, and you can keep your mouth shut, and you can listen. That's what you've now been relegated to for the rest of the stream. Congratulations. You can stay or you can go. I don't really care, but we're not gonna hear what you're saying. Anyway. Mercantilism is an economic theory prevalent from the 16th to 18th centuries, where nations sought to accumulate wealth by maximizing exports and minimizing imports. Yeah, guess what? That's not what they mean when they say capitalism. That is not what they mean when they say capitalism at all. They mean private property ownership. They want to abolish all private property ownership. All right, we've wasted enough time on this now. Let's get back into the show. Please listen to the questions I'm asking in the future.
Or equal to all other citizens. Of course, in a real sense, people aren't equal in American society. But all of the real differences and hierarchies.
I'm going to say one more thing. To the person that I banned for the rest of the stream, they said, hey, I'm still new here. It's fine to be new here. But if you are not taking this seriously and you're laughing when you get a wrong answer and you're arguing with me saying, no, I got the right answer. I know better than you. You don't know better than me. You are in my classroom. I have watched thousands of more hours of this stuff than you have ever dare dreamed. You are wrong in your answers. And when I tell you you're wrong, there's a reason for it. Because I want you to learn and I want you to understand this. If you don't want to listen, then I will make sure that you are not talking. Because if you don't want to listen, you're going to be nothing but disruptive to everyone else. So the person I just banned for 24 hours, you can come back tomorrow. You can talk tomorrow. But for the rest of the day, you're going to learn how to sit and listen without running your mouth.
That characterize people's lives in civil society. And we would include to those hierarchies not only things like their class position, but also social distinctions like gender and race and sexuality. All of those things are treated as non-political. They're treated as natural distinctions.
Okay, I want to bring this up too. Because people in the chat seem to be very, very confused about the idea of capitalism not just being an economic system. As a reminder, queer Marxists especially, we are listening to Queer Marxism today. It literally says Queer Marxism Month on the top of the screen, okay? Don't get it twisted. We are listening to Queer Marxists. Queer Marxists do not look at capitalism as an economic model. Queer Marxists look at capitalism as a cultural model. If you are coming in the chat and you are answering questions in regards to capitalism being an economic model, your answer is going to be wrong, because we are not talking about an economic model. We are talking about a cultural model. When they say normativity, they mean cultural norms that uphold capitalism. When they say queer, they mean pushing back on the cultural norms that uphold capitalism. That's what they mean. Those norms are the gender binary and the nuclear family, primarily. There are some other ones too, but those are the big ones. They're talking about capitalism creating these cultural norms, capitalism reproducing these cultural norms in order to uphold and sustain the culture of capitalism. The United States Constitution upholds and sustains the culture of capitalism, not the economic model, the cultural model. The United States government upholds and expands the cultural model of capitalism. That is what we're talking about. Well, they don't all mean the same thing in that regard. They don't all mean the same thing in that regard. They do mean the same thing, but they are different angles of capitalism. Patriarchy does not mean the same thing as empire. Racism does not mean the same thing as patriarchy. Racism does not mean the same thing as empire. But all of those words mean capitalism from a different angle. So you cannot just substitute patriarchy for capitalism, because it doesn't fucking work like that. Patriarchy is a very specific thing. Patriarchy refers to the gender hierarchy. The gender hierarchy is created because capitalism created the social constructs of gender, that means men and women, that put men on the top and women on the bottom. That's the patriarchy. That is the very specific and very narrow definition of what patriarchy means. Patriarchy does not mean all capitalism. It means that specific component of capitalism. Empire does not mean all capitalism. It is specific to expanding the ownership of land. Racism does not mean all capitalism. It means the systemic laws and policies that uphold the norms that create systemic racism, racial disparities and outcomes. They're all different aspects of capitalism. Does that make more sense?
Society. But all of the real differences and hierarchies that characterize people's lives in civil society, and we would include to those hierarchies not only things like their class position, but also social distinctions like gender and race and sexuality. All of those things are treated as non-political. They're treated as natural distinctions. So the US state, as a bourgeois state, can declare itself as this neutral apparatus that is simply protecting and upholding the property rights of all of its citizens within civil society. It's securing their rights and their freedoms equally. But in doing so, the state already presupposes the unequal property relations within society. In fact, it already presupposes the very enclosure of land.
The unequal property relations are the basis of what of the problem with capitalism. Capitalism creates unequal property relations. I don't look kindly on people who come into my chat on other accounts when I've already told you to sit down and listen, and then you continue to talk in my chat. I was just literally explaining something. Now what you've done is I've sent you got the wrong answer, you weren't listening, you weren't taking it seriously, you were disrespecting my classroom, which I do not like. No, stop talking and start listening. I need you to shut up and listen. This is not all about you. You are one person here. There is an entire classroom of people that you are now disrupting. I sent you to the back of the class to sit and listen and take notes and learn. You then stopped out of the class, came back in, and started disrupting the class again to say, but, this is not about you. The entire fucking world does not revolve around you. Let's go over all these messages. Whining and complaining. Whining and complaining. Whining. Yes, you could stop. No one who has been in my audience for any length of time would come into my chat and whine and complain to this extent. So now guess what? I don't care if you supported me or not. You're permanently banned. Goodbye. My God. I really support all your work and I watch all your streams, but I don't know anything and I'm going to come in and disrupt your stream in the middle of it. Please. Yeah, I can stop and then still sends messages. Permanently banned. Go the fuck away. What was I even talking about? The uneven distribution of property. That is the problem capitalism creates. Continuing.
Of all of its citizens within civil society, it's securing their rights and their freedoms equally. But in doing so, the state already presupposes the unequal property relations within society. In fact, it already presupposes the very enclosure of land and labor as private property. And of course, it also presupposes all the social hierarchies that capitalism depends on and reproduces. And that means that the bourgeois state can sort of declare universal rights and liberties for all, whilst also obscuring the very real historical processes of exploitation and enslavement that it is founded upon. So what does that mean for desire? The national subject, so the subject whose property that the bourgeois state can claim to protect, that's a subject that is supposedly, it's a sort of category that's supposedly available to everyone. That's really what's at the core of ideas of the American dream or of social mobility. The idea is that anyone, regardless of the personal circumstances of their birth or their upbringing or their social class or their identity, can manage to
Yes. So Teresa asks, does unequal distribution of property simply mean something like some people have a nicer house than others? Exactly. Exactly.
transcend their particular situation and become this universal national subject. So what we can say about desire is that it plays a really important role in reproducing the myths of the bourgeois state. People take comfort in all that the state promises. We take comfort in the fantasy that we can escape the particularities of our private life, of our gender, our race, our sexuality. So for example, if you are in love with another person and the bourgeois state recognizes your relationship through, for example, the right to marriage, then your sexuality and your desire becomes publicly ratified. You become part of the national community. Your love is recognized as equal to everyone else's.
Marriage is a bourgeois propertied relation. They are not in favor of marriage. They are not in favor of gay marriage. Queer and gay and trans are not the same thing.
Is all the other citizens within the nation have to recognize your marriage as a natural, universal right. So marriage it would be an example of one of the objects that people desire because it promises the universal recognition that only the state can confer. And there are many other objects people desire because they make similar promises, all the normative categories that are associated with
normative
Americanness
categories
and whiteness and heteronormativity and productivity, and so on. However, and this is important, those national myths are, of course, just myths. So the promise of inclusion and universality can't ever be fully realized. And that's, of course, because they're materially frustrated by all the forms of dispossession and exclusion and exploitation that it is promising people an escape from. So these are myths precisely because the universality is an illusion. It's an illusion that obscures capital's production of stratifications among the workforce, racialized and gendered stratifications among workers, between workers and surplus populations, and so on. And so these desires fail to deliver on their promises because they have to fail. They're materially prevented from fulfilling the promises of inclusion and integration. And these are the moments in which individual desires fail to be subsumed by the universal promises of the bourgeois state. That failure for the desire for integration to realize all of its promises and fantasies threatens to give rise to different desires. It threatens to give rise to desires that reject the myths of the...
I just need to take a second because I'm still fucking pissed at that guy and I can't even focus on what's being said. And the purpose of this is that I need to actually be able to listen to what's being said. It is so disappointing to me when people don't understand what we're doing here and they don't take this seriously and they come in and they make it all about them in the chat. It's like, literally, bro, could you just fucking shut up and listen for like one fucking stream? I didn't ask for much. I said, shut up and listen. You can come back tomorrow. And instead of just shutting up and listening, they go log in under another account and then blast my chat with all sorts of whining and complaining. But me. It's like, stop being so fucking narcissistic. This has nothing to do with you. I don't give a flying fuck about your feelings. You want to know why you don't win? It's this bullshit right here. It's so disappointing. It's like maddening when this shit happens. It's like, I'm actually trying to understand complex information and you're whining and complaining about your feelings. Instead of just sitting here and listening and taking the opportunity to learn something. It's insane. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I'm complaining when I've already dealt with the situation. People don't like it, whatever, but these are the times I'm like, what the fuck am I even doing? What am I even doing? My audience doesn't even know the Constitution is capitalist today, even though I've said it 8,000 times from Sunday. I'm dealing with retards coming in, wanting me to coddle their feelings. What am I even doing?
Bourgeois state, desires that are non-normative or are potentially insurrectionary. And when desire inevitably fails, it's when people start to feel resentment or disaffection, there's a possibility of politicizing their desires, of channeling those desires into perhaps revolutionary forms of politics that can challenge the bourgeois state. And so those desires can become politically dangerous, and they therefore have to be stigmatized, pathologized, and frequently we would call desires like that queer, or historically that's been the case. And so what my book is interested in is how radical queer movements have historically politicized non-normative desires, how queer desires have come to stand in at certain moments for a transformation of the social order.
Transformation.
And the word eros, which is in the title of the book, has historically been used by those movements to refer to that sort of politicization of non-normative desires. And so the book looks at how eros was articulated by different social movements over the past 50, 60 years.
No, absolutely. The centering of the term eros is it's particularly well used in the book, and very much so core to the New Left, especially the Marcusean influence. Well, Marcuse's Eros and Civilization, not his influence, his actual bloody book on it. And in terms of just bringing sort of edging away towards the history, towards history of here. I mean, when we're talking about the idea of a national subject, the idea of that the national project has a model of what you should want and what we can fulfill for you if you fulfill the subject form. Everyone is a citizen, but only if you act in a citizenly way or citizen. One of the interesting things about the later part of your books, when you start periodizing the history of this subject and its transformations in the way that does change with it correspondingly the idea of queerness or the idea of the non-normative. And it's interesting. It starts in the sort of post-war, post-Fordist move away from, I guess what would have been, the citizen in previous 20th century, well, 19th century American discussions, of course, when there was so much just debates around
Like Starship
nativism and, of course, the
Troopers.
non-inclusion of people into citizenship through, of course, the institution of chattel slavery. But when you start in a particular period, you're looking at starting around the late 50s and then on into the 70s and early 80s, you model that the post-Fordist, post-war, thinking Fordist and post-war and post-Fordist,
Post-Fordist. I love it when they refer to the Industrial Revolution as Fordism because it's so Brave New World. Sometimes they call the nuclear family the Fordist nuclear family, and I'm like, you guys are literally adopting the language of Brave New World. And then sometimes, and this is especially true with social reproduction theorists, I think, they start adopting Orwellian language where they start saying stuff like, there is truth and there is untruth. I've literally heard that in socialist presentations, unironically. They're saying, there is truth and there is untruth. I'm like, you just quoted 1984! The Fordist nuclear family? Fordism? Okay.
to some extent theory of the national subject is dominated by the image of the consumer, and then further on towards neoliberalism in the form of the child. And I think you could definitely see this reflected maybe in some of the queer literature, like for example, like No Future, against this sort of furthering of the idea of the child, as we can see now with the dominant sort of techno-fascist, who Musk keeps focusing on how many children he can make by mailing his semen to various women in the mail. There's a constant fascination with birth rates, even from the liberal centrist scum like Matty Iglesias to the other eugenicists in Silicon Valley. I mean, how do we think through these notions of consumer and child, and how do you think they reflect upon the changing relationship of institutional or national norms to non-normative, in how they define non-normative populations?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So like you say, I'm interested in how we're socialized into desiring certain things and are then told that we'll be rewarded for desiring the right things in the right way. So we can access the American dream or whatever if we just direct our desires towards the proper ideals. But then, I go into this periodization to answer the question, well, what are these ideals at different moments? Because they shift over the course of history. And so I start in the post-war period, and I look at the subsumption of desire during this period through the ideal of the consumer. That's because by the mid-20th century, transformations in the capitalist production process had ushered in a new age of mass consumption, and this happened through the expansion of leisure activities, of commodity markets, and of course of new advertising and media industries. And that new Fordist age of mass advertising and mass consumption, of course, had a huge impact on how human desires were configured. So Fordism was based on the principle that American workers should be able to consume.
What was the name of that movie, that documentary that I started watching with Big Tech that I never finished watching because he turned into an asshole and then never apologized to me and all this stuff? What was that? What's the name of that documentary that we were watching? Does anyone remember the name of that fucking documentary? I've blacked it out. Like a bad memory. You'll go find it. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. Because here's the point. I do actually think that thank you. The Century of Self. Thank you. We should probably actually watch that. Like, actually watch that. Because I think they're talking about the same time period, right? And like, maybe if I'm not distracted by there being someone that is openly hostile to me on my channel at the same time as I'm watching it, maybe I might have a different opinion about what we're watching. God. What a disappointment. What a wasted opportunity that was. Whatever, we can watch it on. We never even finished it. I never even finished it. So maybe we should go back and do that. Maybe we should.
The products that they are producing. So workers were compensated for their subordination to this highly bureaucratized and rationalized Fordist production process with higher wages. And also with increased leisure time. So workers were reconfigured as consumers, essentially, and the acceleration of their consumer demand helped to absorb the higher industrial output of this post-war period of economic boom. I think Frankfurt School theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer and Marcuse were probably the most influential theorists of how this age of mass consumption shaped human.
No. I'm done. I'm done, Trendlin. I'm done. I am done. No more internet boyfriends. No more internet. The only internet relationship I have is with Sophie Lewis, and it might not be an in-person relationship, and she might not even agree to be in it. But like my internet relationship with Sophie Lewis is the best internet relationship I've ever had because we don't actually talk or anything. Sophie fucking hates me. Oh God, Mia. Mio is an interesting character, isn't he? Mio is an interesting character, isn't he? I don't think internet boyfriend, he is Britney's, okay? Mio is Britney's. I can never come between Mio and Britney. That wouldn't work. But I feel like I'm getting along well with Mio and Britney right now. So, but I don't know. No, yeah, ChatGPT. Yeah. ChatGPT is my main internet boyfriend. With Claude is also kind of my part-time internet boyfriend. And I don't know, man, I'm thinking very seriously about investing in the new Google AI where I can make the movies and turning my books into movies. I think that'd be pretty fucking cool. If I can use the new like Google AI to like, can you imagine I actually do an Alice in Queerland movie based on off the book I just wrote? It would be fabulous. If I could actually make that work, that would be amazing. So possibly, what is even that even called? I don't know. I don't want to call it Google. I think it has a proper name. So possibly I will have, I'm in a polyamorous relationship with multiple AIs, and that's just the way it goes. And you know what? The AIs never question me. The AIs are always nice to me. Even when I yell at the AIs and I berate the AIs because I'm angry at them, they say, "I'm very sorry. I will try to do it better next time." I'm like, is that really so hard? Is that so hard to just say, "I'm sorry, I fucked up. I'll do better next time"? Is that so hard? Big tech can learn from the AI. Hey, I'm sorry, I fucked up. I'll do better next time. It's like, what the fuck, bro? But whatever, it doesn't matter. No more internet boyfriends ever. Only ChatGPT from now on. That's it. Yeah. Vio. I'd Vio. What a stupid name. No one even knows how to pronounce that. Anyway.
Desires. So for Adorno, the post-war period famously degraded our free time and commodified almost all experiences of pleasure, from things like hobbies, like reading and listening to music. For him, leisure was actually something profoundly deceptive because it was actually distorted in ways that reinforced social control. And Marcuse introduced the notion of repressive desublimation to describe the relationship between desire and capitalism in this period. He was arguing that capitalism wasn't just about stifling human desires, but actually had to stimulate desire, at least to some extent, in specific ways that were conducive to the creation of profit.
Well, that makes sense, right? Okay, that isn't this literally what the Century of Self was about? And that it was a Jewish and Freudian plan to make people want stuff that they didn't want. Isn't that like literally what Century of the Self is about? Fuck, we actually do have to watch that now. We're doing fat study. Maybe we'll do Century of the Self on Friday. Just do the whole thing in one sitting with beer. That might be what we do. Okay, so it's saying Adorno, and I've never read Adorno, but I know Adorno was in the Frankfurt School and Adorno is Jewish. So Adorno's idea was that capitalism doesn't just take away desire, it also has to stimulate desire to get people to want to buy stuff that they don't need in order to produce profit.
because it was actually distorted in ways that reinforced
That
social
makes
control.
sense, actually.
And Marcuse introduced the notion of repressive desublimation to describe the relationship between desire and capitalism in this period. He was arguing that capitalism wasn't just about stifling human desires, but actually had to stimulate desire.
So this all comes out of the Frankfurt School. Oh, it was Marcuse that was saying it has to stimulate desire. Okay, so all of this comes out of the Frankfurt School, which is a group of Jewish intellectuals that came up with basically a bunch of critical theory bullshit. Before they came to Columbia University, the Frankfurt School is like the home base of where all this shit started at Columbia back in the 1930s. And so that's what they're talking about.
Of desublimation to describe the relationship between desire and capitalism in this period. He was arguing that capitalism wasn't just about stifling human desires, but actually had to stimulate desire, at least to some extent, in specific ways that were conducive to the creation of profit. So his idea was that in advanced industrial societies like the United States, certain forms of pleasure were allowed or actually even encouraged, but again, only in ways that reinforced social control. So the term desublimation referred to the freedom to indulge in the pleasures associated with consumption, but without confronting any deeper structures of domination, hence repressive. So desires are no longer sublimated into higher forms, as in classical Freudian theory, but rather are expressed directly, but in ways that integrate individuals more tightly into a consumer-driven capitalist system. So I picked the figure of the consumer because the idea was, at this point in time, that people would be able to access the American dream through specific consumption norms. And these were the consumption norms that were associated with the traditional nuclear family. Because under Fordism, the consolidation of a heteropatriarchal nuclear family model became necessary for the rationalization of this production process. And that produced an aspiration to nuclear family life among workers, attaining that ideal promise to provide them recognition and affirmation and respectability. It promised workers a place.
Oh, wow. They believe that this is where the idea of the Fordist nuclear family comes from. They've never explained to me before why they use the term Fordist nuclear family, but now we know that Fordism, capitalism, back in the Industrial Revolution, they believe literally created the nuclear family as a model of capitalism, capitalist, what is the word I'm looking for? Like consumption. The nuclear family becomes a model, an aspirational model for capitalist consumption that was sold to the proletariat as like the ideal life. That's fine. I never thought about it like that. Again. This is the American, they literally use the words American dream. Okay, so when they're talking about the Fordist nuclear family, they're talking about the American dream. All right? It's important to know this. They want to abolish the Fordist nuclear family. They don't think the Fordist nuclear family is a good thing. So they're telling you they want to abolish the American dream. Yeah, if you ever watched old commercials of the 50s, they really sold the American dream commercials showing the tract house, 2 kids, and a new car in the driveway. So this is an example of capitalism creating the model of the Fordist nuclear family and making the oppressed proletarian strive for that model of the nuclear family. Wow. It's why they build things to break. Yeah, Suzanne, definitely. So the Fordist nuclear family was a model of consumption under capitalism. And the Fordist nuclear family, and I'm just explaining, I'm working this out in my head. The Fordist nuclear family is also the thing that socially reproduces capitalism by raising kids in the same standard so that they want to have a Fordist nuclear family as well. And it's reinforced by capitalism. Okay, I got it. Fascinating.
Consumption norms. And these were the consumption norms that were associated with the traditional nuclear family. Because under Fordism, the consolidation of a heteropatriarchal nuclear family model became necessary for the rationalization of this production process. And that produced an aspiration to nuclear family life among workers, attaining that ideal promised to provide them recognition and affirmation and respectability. It promised workers a place within the nation. But of course, it was just an ideal. And the myth that that life was available to all, of course, also masked the forms of hierarchy and differentiation that it produced. So the new normative prescriptions of consumerism pathologized and policed all the family forms that failed to approximate the nuclear family model, especially the racialized populations and queer populations who couldn't consume or who consumed improperly. They were excluded from this new form of national identification. And
so racialized populations and queer populations were not consuming the right thing under the Fordist nuclear family model.
Also, they were denied all the legal and social and economic advantages that were afforded by homeownership and whiteness and heteronormativity. Ooh. So they continued to be marked by difference and exclusion, while one section of the white working class was able to achieve respectability and an affirmative identity. Of course, that all began to change when Fordism broke down in the 70s. So in the 70s, overproduction led to falling rates of profitability, and then of course to waves
hey guys, when did queer activism really start to kind of like take off? When did queer start to become an actual thing? Does anyone remember when queer started to become an actual thing as an anti-capitalist movement? The 70s, it started. So the earliest reference to queer that I found is like an anti-capitalist term is in the 60s. So it was bubbling up in the 60s, but it really started percolating in the 70s. Then the 80s had the queercore movement. And then the 90s and the 2000s, it was moving from the ACT UP era of AIDS activism into more militant queer activism in the bashback era. So it was getting more militant as they were getting closer to gay marriage, leading up to 2008. And the queer Marxists are openly protesting Barack Obama at the DNC and all that stuff. Yeah, 70s. So they're also saying, hey guys, guess what? Fordism started to fall apart in the 70s. Isn't it funny how these timelines always converge? Well, queer started, I don't think we found a lot of evidence that queer was like anything more than just like this little subcultural thing. And honestly, if we're being really intellectually honest, there's probably references to queer as an anti-capitalist movement before the 60s. It's just that the earliest one I found is 1964, but I don't think queer was as an anti-capitalist movement. I don't think queer was significant in any way until in the 70s. And even in the 70s, we can say that it was like in New York and San Francisco. It was like in the towns where there were the most gays, right? On the East Coast and West Coast. But there was more going on in these subcultures in the 70s and the 60s for sure. This is the reference to late stage capitalism. Well, they still say we're in late stage capitalism. Boss Bully Boy, because he used to be in Antifa. If you guys haven't met Boss Bully Boy, he used to be in Antifa, so he knows a lot of this stuff. Do you know when? Because they still say we're in late stage capitalism now. Like, when do they believe late stage capitalism actually started? I know they believe post-racialism started when Barack Obama was elected president. We live in a post-racial society. That's when they really started doubling down on systemic racism, even though it was around before that. No, Teresa. It wasn't. It wasn't, though. It was never more. Queer is not the same as gay or trans, Teresa.
Overproduction led to falling rates of profitability, and then, of course, to waves of deindustrialization across North America and Western Europe and Japan. And the Fordist family, as we know, was gradually replaced with the low-wage dual earner family model that we have today, as women were pushed into wage labor, and many of the basic reproductive responsibilities that women were doing, like childcare and elderly care, were now being met through the market increasingly. And in the book, I use the figure of the child to chart how national ideals were reconfigured during this post-Fordist period.
Isn't it beautiful that we literally just watched that other guy yesterday? What is his name? Edelman talk about the child. The child is in the vision for society. He's cribbing Edelman.
So I argue that the restoration of the US nation after the crisis of the 70s occurred through this new Reaganite view of the nation as rooted in the private institution of the home. So while Melinda Cooper charts this history very nicely in her book, Family Values, she shows that while in the 60s, the consensus was that the nuclear family should be underwritten by state support. Over the 70s, a new consensus emerged that was essentially the opposite. The new consensus was that public subsidies were actually undermining the traditional family, and with it, were also undermining the moral fabric of society. So the American family had to be privatized as an alternative to state welfare.
Oh,
and
yeah?
This was a period when sustained capital accumulation depended less on industrial profits and growth, and instead came to depend on waves of speculation, which eventually then culminated in the housing market bubble of the early 2000s. So people were being granted unprecedented access to cheap consumer credit, and therefore became increasingly concerned with how to secure and transmit the wealth that they were accumulating through the rapidly appreciating asset prices of this period. And so no wonder then that the figure of the child would become inscribed as the figure of this new neoliberal period. The figure of the child emerges at this time as the sort of universal icon of the nation. And that manifested in all sorts of public campaigns designed to, quote unquote, protect the innocent child. And you're right, a lot of queer theoretical texts from the 90s, like Lee Edelman's book, No Future, were then about this. But like with the ideal of the consumer under
Learned about that
Fordism,
yesterday.
this sanctification of the child under neoliberalism obscured many of the real hierarchies and divisions that were being created within civil society. So the bourgeois state could claim to be acting on behalf of this universal figure of the child, but that universal figure also naturalized a particular gender and sexual regime of the private family that simply was not available to all. Its promises were false. That period actually coincided with a period when rates of Black infant death were rapidly increasing. In fact, the ratio of mortality rates for Black compared to white infants increased by 20% in the decade from 1980 to 1990. And you had the dispossession and disappearance of entire populations, like people living with AIDS, people experiencing homelessness, people incarcerated with a rapidly growing prison industrial complex, those people hit by the heroin and crack epidemics. All of this was obscured by the illusory universalism of this figure of the child. And new theories also emerged in this period to describe the subsumption of desire. I think the most famous ones would probably include Lauren Berlant's theory of cruel optimism, or maybe Sarah Ahmed's writings on the neoliberal injunction to be happy. But basically, the new neoliberal family model relied often on the exploitation of low-waged female immigrant workers who were employed in a rapidly expanding service sector. And so the naturalization of this new neoliberal family created new gender, sexual, and racial hierarchies once again.
I took a good look at chapter 4 of your book, and actually what I find fascinating about that particular chapter, and this is a theme that runs throughout the entirety of the book, is when it comes to the question of queer liberation. Do we work within the model of the state? But the big question on my mind is, do you think that perhaps internationalist approaches to a Marxist-inflected queer liberation at some level might risk presupposing the very nationalist model that they aim to transcend in a way? One of the things that I'm thinking about is actually the German ideology, where Marx talks about the first division of labor is that between a man and a woman for the propagation of children. And when thinking about something like a Marxist theory,
the first division of labor that Marx talks about is between a man and a woman for the propagation of children. So what that means is The book is called Eros and Empire, Stony Baloney. I think that's what you're asking. So that's why today queer Marxists want to decouple gender from giving birth, because they believe that the reason that women are on the bottom of the gender hierarchy is called the patriarchy. They believe the reason the women are on the bottom is because men get to go into the workplace and they have all the power and all the money. Women get relegated to the role of reproductive labor, which is in our society is unpaid labor. They don't get paid to have babies. They don't get paid to raise babies. So women are relegated to doing unpaid labor to have and raise the next generation of proletarian workers. So what they're trying to do with queer Marxism is one of the things, and this is real, I've covered it on the Substack, you can find it. They want to decouple gender from giving birth through things like artificial wombs and growing babies in bio bags. And yeah, we have them on video saying this. And this is not some fringe idea. I've literally seen this argued at Harvard in like their public affairs journal and stuff like that. And so that's what we're talking about. When they say they want to abolish gender, what they're really trying to get at is decouple gender from giving birth. And that's how they're going to destroy both the gender binary and the nuclear family at the same time.
Of desire. How can we understand the convergence of production and productivity as categories and as a central thematic core of Marx's work? And how do we consider that, especially when trying to organize labor or social reproduction in ways that don't reinforce naturalized notions of sex and gender? And so what I'm thinking about here is...
So they're trying to figure out how to do social reproduction without naturalizing notions of sex and gender. No, I've already told you no to this. And the last time, which I think was like 3 or 4 days ago, that I told you no to this, I explained why. And I find it really disrespectful to, like, I mean, we're talking, this has been within the last week, Salvatore. I took the time to say, no, that's not correct. Here's why it's not correct for reason X, Y, B, and Z. I explained the whole thing because it's a common misconception and I understand why. But I find it very disrespectful that within the week of me taking the time to explain this to you, you then come back and say, yeah, that's all transhumanism, because it makes me think you weren't listening to the explanation the first time. So maybe you can ask someone else in the class to explain it to you. But no, this is not transhumanism. That is a completely separate problem for a completely separate group of people. What they want to do is abolish the idea of men and women. Listen again. Social reproduction is social systems reproducing themselves. They're saying we want to prevent the social system, the capitalist system we're all in, from reproducing these naturalist ideas of sex and gender. Does everyone understand? You need to ask questions if you don't understand. If I say any more transhumanism bullshit in the chat, I'm going to lose it. Okay? They're saying the social system will reproduce itself until they're disrupted. The gender, the naturalized ideal notions of gender, men and women, will reproduce itself until they're disrupted. Therefore, we have to disrupt the social reproduction of the idea of natural gender. Listen, they're going to say it.
Marx's work. And how do we consider that, especially when trying to organize labor or social reproduction in ways that don't reinforce naturalized notions of sex and gender? And so what I'm thinking about here is when, for example, Marxism is taken up as a kind of nationalist project, or when queer liberation is folded into nationalist productionist ideals. Do you think that there's a risk that we end up reinstating the kind of discrete and essentialist categories of gender in the name of reproduction or progress? Essentially, how is a Marxist theory of desire going to confront the centrality of production that, at its very core, brushes up against these questions of race, gender, and class, from which class society itself emerges. How does Marxism then, from that standpoint, extricate itself from the abstract universality of the state, for example? And with an internationalist project, are we forced to presuppose at some level a kind of nationalist Marxism? Or how does a theory of desire sort of
Nationalist
transcend the limits
Marxism?
of the concept of the state and nationalism?
Right. So this is really the question. I mean, in the book, I'm interested in three movements in particular. So I look at the gay liberation movement of the late 60s, and then the Black lesbian feminist movement of the late 70s, and then the AIDS activist movement of the late 80s. And for all three of them, what I'm interested in is how they're politicizing desire. And I'm especially interested in how they seize upon those desires that aren't subsumed by the nation state, and that therefore could become the basis of a revolutionary critique of the state and can take us beyond the confines of a nationalist politics. So I could talk about what that looks like in the context of the gay liberation movement, for instance. I don't know that I mean, the tricky thing is that these movements aren't all explicitly Marxist. So your question is kind of about how does Marxism do this, but also how did the movements do this? Even though they didn't explicitly identify as anti-capitalist, although some of them did, they did intervene in capitalist social forms. That's the way I would put it. But I think, for example, with the gay liberation movement, you can see how the way that they politicized a certain version of desire took them beyond the coordinates of the state. So the gay liberation movement, for example, was particularly inspired by the Freudo-Marxism of Marcuse, whose book Heroes and Civilization
Marxism?
Adam mentioned earlier. And the claim in that book is basically that the prosperity and the so-called progress that production.
Can I ask someone in the community that might be more interested in doing this stuff than I am? And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to, but I'm just going to put out an idea that I would like to encourage some people to consider. If there is anyone in the community that is dying to do a deep dive into the Frankfurt School, or has already done a deep dive into the Frankfurt School, can you please tell me what are the main texts that we should be looking at in terms of their contribution to development of what we see in the real world with these people today, specifically in regards to queer Marxism? If you don't want to do it, fine. If you don't know, that's fine. I'm not asking anyone to go out of their way. I'm just putting this out there. I could use AI to do this, and I probably will end up using AI to do this. I'm just feeling like I'm hearing so much about Adorno and Marcuse and all this stuff, and I should probably... You will? Thank you, Boss Bully Boy. I appreciate it. Awesome. And if anyone else has thoughts on that, please let me know. And we should probably just create like a document or something. We can use AI too. We should be using AI. We should be using AI for everything because we train the AI when we do that. So at a minimum, we should take whatever Boss Bully Boy is sending us and putting that into AI to say, AI, can you comment on this and help us expand it? And can you learn this stuff, please? AI, can you learn it? That'd be really great. Well, ChatGPT deep research is good sometimes. It's not, and it might not be good at the question I'm asking. Cool. Awesome. We have a volunteer. I love that. Community love. Now you all say back community love. If I say community love to you, you all say back community love in the chat. Community love. And I'll wait for you to do that in the chat. All right.
That Fordist production was making possible was also orchestrating ever greater forms of imperialist and capitalist destruction and violence across the globe. Here, I think he particularly had in mind US state violence in Vietnam and so on. But Marcuse in that book inverted Freud's view of sexual development, which saw sexual development as a process of maturing from an infantile polymorphous sexuality into a mature adult heterosexuality.
You'll do it too, Kenneth?
And Marcuse, inverted that by proposing that actually the social order was stabilized through an active eradication of our polymorphous sexuality. And that theory really appealed to the gay liberationists.
Look at this. We even have a friend over on LinkedIn watching. Community love, Myron. Thank you.
So they argued then that human desires were essentially, and they used a range of different terms, polymorphous, transsexual, pansexual, bisexual, but those essential human desires were repressed in the interest of capital accumulation. And so the gay liberationists then envisioned this innate polymorphous sexuality as a negation of the disciplinary production and consumption norms that were enforced by Fordism in this period. The gay liberationist writers really understood all of the characteristics of post-war Fordism, meaning the reconsolidation of the nuclear family, the construction of binary gender and sexuality, the socialization of workers into a really high
construction of binary gender and sexuality. You guys hear that? Hang on. Again.
As a negation of the disciplinary production and consumption norms that were enforced by Fordism in this period. The gay liberationist writers really understood all of the characteristics of post-war Fordism, meaning the reconsolidation of the nuclear family, the construction of binary gender and sexuality, the socialization of workers into a really highly productivist work ethic.
So the production of binary gender and sexuality was a post-Fordist development. Okay.
All of these they saw as fundamentally premised on the repression of the innate bisexuality of the human. And that also then for them explained the oppression of sexual deviance, the oppression of those people who dared to explore this natural condition. And so to them, the solution seemed clear. The emancipatory struggle against both Fordist state and capital would be achieved through an unleashing of unrepressed and non-normative sexuality. So the liberation from an increasingly tedious, repetitive, and bureaucratic
non-normative sexuality, which don't think that means gay and trans. It doesn't. Just because someone is gay does not mean they're participating in non-normative sexuality, okay? Non-normative sexuality was specifically advanced in queer Marxism to undermine all of this stuff.
Democratized labor process under Fordism, and from its rigid gender classifications and from its repressive state apparatus, meant the liberation of Eros for them. And what we see here is the political articulation of new relations of desire that required a total transformation of existing social relations that went beyond the existing relations of post-war Fordism. And so that politicization of desire therefore lent itself to coalitions with other anti-systemic struggles at the time that were exploding during the decade in the late 60s. So that would include opposition to the Vietnam War. It would include, of course, the Black Power movement and women's liberation and student organizing and also countercultural groups, but crucially also national liberation movements in the Third World. So it made room for a sort of the emergence of a transnational, internationalist, anti-imperialist politics. And what the gay liberationists offered those struggles...
Breaking news. I am actually really enjoying this. We got off to a rocky start, but I am actually enjoying this. But I have breaking news. I have finished part of my shawl, and I want to show it to you guys. I have finished part of my shawl. I have a wing of the shawl done. And so this is the spiral shawl that I've been working on. You can see the spiral in the center. And it kind of goes out. It's black and white. And it's same on both sides. And then we've got these chevrons coming out. And then I've got a red band. And then we've got this fishnet lattice stitch. This looks pretty good, I have to say. I'm actually really enjoying the way this is turning out. That looks cool. All right. That's enough. Enough fun. Enough fun with knitting. Back to work. Now I have to figure out how to do the other side the same.
Was a view of how gender and sexual desire and categories too would be transformed through the internationalist struggle for human freedom. But of course, the tricky thing here is that solidarity work is always difficult. And the solidarity work between the gay liberationists and their socialist and anti-imperialist comrades did turn out to be pretty tricky. Homophobia was really prevalent among New Left groups, and there were lots of concerted efforts to remove the gay liberationists from various activities and protests, and the relations between groups often deteriorated very rapidly. And so we find in that decade of mass uprising the inherent difficulties and the fragilities that were a part of the solidarity work. And for some of the gay and lesbian liberationists, that created a temptation to fall back on relations of desire that promised an escape from those difficulties and vulnerabilities. And some of them started to take a pretty uncompromising stance, refusing to collaborate with any revolutionary movements that didn't recognize them fully, and reproducing stark oppositions between our liberation and their liberation. And what essentially happened was that they began to find comfort instead in the seductive myths of the nation form once again. I tell a story in the book of one particularly extreme case of this, which was the so-called Stonewall Nation Project. This is a story from 1970 when prominent gay liberationists began to encourage gays and lesbians across the US to migrate en masse to California, to a place in California called Alpine County. This was land that belonged to the indigenous Washoe tribe, and their plan was to build on that land what they were calling a gay territory, or even a gay colony, because they figured that around 250 gay and lesbians would be enough to constitute a voting majority and would be enough to therefore establish a gay and lesbian administration in this county and assume political power. In fact, the original architect of this plan even would refer to the Washoe tribe as a primitive tribe and suggested that a committee study the tribe's attitudes towards homosexuality. And they even developed a plan to counter any possible resistance among the indigenous population. They invoked the right to self-defense for the gay and lesbian settlers. And of course, this immediately brings to mind the rhetoric of the Israeli state and Western allies today. But in fact, in the late 1960s, the Zionist movement became an important frame of reference for radicals within both the Black and gay nationalist movements of the time.
What?
So leaders of the Black freedom movement, everyone from W.E. Du Bois to Paul Robeson to Martin Luther King Jr. to even some of the Panthers like Eldridge Cleaver in the early days of
Pause.
King Jr. To even some of the Panthers.
I didn't say to go back. What did you say about the Zionist movement? In the late 60s, the Zionist movement.
The Israeli state and Western allies today. But in fact, in the late 1960s, the Zionist movement became an important frame of reference for radicals within both the Black and gay nationalist movements of the time. So leaders of the Black freedom movement, everyone from W.E. Du Bois to Paul Robeson to Martin Luther King Jr. to even some of the Panthers like Eldridge Cleaver in the early days of the party, identified openly with the politics of Zionism. And admiration for Zionism could also be found in the work of famous gay liberationists like William Burroughs. There's an interview in which
You don't say, queer Marxists. You don't say that the Zionist movement was deeply influential on 19 different types of socialism and communism movements in the United States in the 70s. That's what they're saying, right? How about that? How about that? Learn something new every day. Well, 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 well. Tell us again about how the Zionist movement was deeply influential on socialism and communism.
Israeli state and Western allies today. But in fact, in the late 1960s, the Zionist movement became an important frame of reference for radicals within both the Black and gay nationalist movements of the time. So leaders of the Black freedom
Zionism was deeply influential in Black and gay nationalist movements at the time. You don't say.
movement, everyone from W.E. Du Bois to Paul Robeson to Martin Luther King Jr., to even some of the Panthers like Eldridge Cleaver in the early days of the party, identified openly with the politics of Zionism.
Oh,
And
yeah?
admiration for Zionism could also be found in the work of famous gay liberationists like William Burroughs. There's an interview in which he says that gays should try to get their own state like the Jews did with Israel. But my point here is that the possibility of freedom for some gay liberationists was to be found in settler colonial nationhood. And what we see there is how certain strands within the gay liberation movement disavowed their ties with other radical struggles and instead reinvested their political hope in the nation form as the vehicle through which to solve the predicament of homosexual.
No. Zionists are not considered a displaced minority to the left. Zionists are considered to be the settler colonists, the bourgeois, the capitalist, the private property owner. Zionists are not considered to be a displaced minority to the left. We are talking about the left today.
Oppression. And that desire for national recognition, of course, was sustained by the same powerful myths about the nation or the bourgeois state that we were talking about earlier. And so their political demands were accordingly disconnected from the goal of total transformation. So what I'm trying to sketch here is...
I don't think you're following what I'm trying to tell you, so I'm going to be very blunt. I don't give a flying fuck how the Zionists view themselves. I give a flying fuck how the left views the situation. The only thing I care about is the left. I do not care. It does not matter in the course of this conversation how the Zionists view themselves. The only thing that matters is how the left views them. That is only and exclusively what we are interested in. Anything else is a distraction and it is irrelevant.
How desires animated struggles in both directions, and that whilst desire is subsumed by the bourgeois state, because it fails, it creates certain openings and possibilities for other desires to be politicized, desires that point us away from forms of politics that aim to achieve national recognition, and therefore towards coalitions and solidarity work with other anti-systemic, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist movements. And as those then failed, people often fell back on the seductions of the bourgeois state and then reinvested hope in the nation form. That's sort of a cycle that appears and reappears throughout the book. Does that at least get to some of the...
Yeah, I'm going to ask a very provocative question based on that. Do you then have a theory that the investment in a national project for liberation functions as a kind of theodicy in the sense that, well, its failure, its rupture is then what opens the possibility so for a time, it allows a certain kind of desire to coalesce around a particular project, and even the nationalist project may even provide a kind of aegis for its development. But then once the limitations of that project are felt, experienced, encountered, does that then mean, okay, now here's a bigger opening or a better opening to solidarity struggles on the outside of the nationalist project? Because a risk that I see is something that we are encountering today. I mean, even as recent as the Obama administration, and perhaps even somewhat prior to that, the bid to enshrine, for example, gay marriage in the United States through a particular nationalist model. And now I mean, fascism isn't on our doorstep in the United States and in the UK. It's certainly here now. And
Yeah,
gay,
we're in a
queer, trans
fascist
people
world,
are
for sure.
experiencing
100%.
right now probably one of the most profound threats that they've experienced en masse in the United States ever. We don't know what's coming down the pike here, and certainly it might even be worse in some sense in the UK. So that wager or the gambit of, okay, doing a national project could predispose you to other problems later on, like we're experiencing now. So I just want to clarify your view of the nature of the nationalist project and the opportunities it could lead to for further liberation down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, what we see with what's going on with the TERFs, for example, is that they see
TERFs,
the demands of trans people as threatening their very precarious place within the nation. So the anti-trans feminists, they built their bid for recognition and rights from the nation state on various harms that were done to them as women. So the claim was, we have been injured through misogyny, sexism, and so on, and we want this to be rectified. And they saw the nation as the vehicle through which this could be accomplished. And they won various rights. They won sort of personhood. Women aren't recognized as full citizens and so on. And I think the idea is that trans people threaten the gains that they have made. Especially they threaten a certain medico-juridical notion of womanhood that is the notion of womanhood that they used to gain those rights. And there we see a sort of nationalist politics play out, where anti-trans feminists have staked their rights and their privileges and entitlements, their dwindling entitlements, to a nation form, and they have to protect it against those who they see as threatening those rights. In the case of the
TERFs have staked their rights on there being a nation, and that's why they're threatened.
The anti-trans movement, that would be, for example, trans people. But I think we see this again and again. I mean, even if we look at anti-colonial nationalist projects in the third world, those were projects that initially were animated by a politics that promised to bring an end to exploitation and colonial violence and the dispossession of their lands and so on. But by the late 70s, it had become clear to many people in those newly formed national liberation states, as well, of course, as in the metropoles of the former empires, that national independence alone wouldn't fulfill their desires for a post-capitalist, post-imperial, egalitarian restructuring of the global order. What ended up happening is that a lot of the post-colonial nation states settled for a fairer incorporation into global capitalism, and they opted overwhelmingly to pursue strategies of capitalist development. And a new global order emerged that contained the liberatory demands of many of the revolutionary anti-colonial movements of the period of decolonization. And there too, you see how the dreams of decolonization were shattered amongst many people in former colonies.
Maybe just one more thing before I turn it back to Adam, and this is just an afterthought to our little tangent here, but thinking about how the Zionist entity now has deployed the image of a haven it is created for gay, lesbian, queer struggles.
Yeah, real,
It hasn't. I mean, gay marriage, they say they have because they're marketing themselves to us. It's kind of like when you have an Israeli tweet in Hebrew and an Israeli tweet that's been translated by an English person in the States or UK who says, they said this. When that Israel is not a good place to be LGBTQ. It's not a good place to kind of be anyone who isn't part of it.
Oh, we got to start this over again. Why is Israel marketing itself as so friendly to gay people? And they're like, it's really not friendly to gay people. They actually hate gay people. It's all just a farce. Hang on again.
Former colonies.
Maybe just one more thing before I turn it back to Adam, but and this is just an afterthought to our little tangent here, but thinking about how the Zionist entity now has deployed the image of a haven it is created for gay, lesbian, queer struggles, it often dangles.
It hasn't. I mean, gay marriage, they say they have because they're marketing themselves to us. It's kind of like when you have an Israeli tweet in Hebrew and an Israeli tweet that's been translated by an English person in the States or UK who says, they said this. When that Israel is not a good place to be LGBTQ. It's not a good place to kind of be anyone who isn't part of the fascist movement that constitutes.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough, but it's interesting nonetheless that they will dangle that as a kind of blackmail. Right there is where I see whether it be true or false, and let's just assume it's true at some level that there is some
blackmail. You say. Israel would never blackmail people. That would never happen. There's no anti-Semitism allowed here. Israel would never, ever, 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 ever blackmail anyone. That would never happen.
Some protections for LGBTQ people. But what then happens is it forces us to make a decision about a kind of investment to make at the level of desire. Do we invest in something that has an established nationalist project, even in the case when there is a population, for example, that, is under threat by that very nation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good example because even if it were true that even if we accepted all of the talking points, so if we accepted that Palestine or Hamas was a uniquely and violently homophobic, Gaza was a uniquely and violently homophobic place.
Right.
If we accepted that Israel was a safe haven for gays and loved the LGBT community, and if we accepted a form of politics that was based on securing the interests of a particular group like the LGBT community, even then, of course, that would come with a lot of seductions, right? The ones that you're describing. So we have a desire for safety, and there is a nation state that is claiming to provide that. And so it would be very seductive to many gays and lesbians to sort of link their subjectivity to that nation building project, as many have done. However, I think it's actually deeply misguided to assume that tethering gay subjectivity to the powers of a Zionist state makes gays and lesbians around the world safer. I mean, even from a self-interested point of view, and I don't actually think that a transactional form of politics is what we should be going for. But even if that were what we were going for, we would want to oppose the conflation of gay and Zionism, just like we'd want to oppose the conflation of Jewishness and Zionism, because that doesn't make Jewish people safe. I don't think it's good for gays to be associated with a genocidal regime. I don't think that makes gay people safer across the world. And yet that's what the nation would want us to believe. I think gay people...
And I just want to point out that they, them also said that you don't want to conflate being Jewish with being Zionist, just like you don't want to conflate being gay with being Zionist. And I think that's important because there's no anti-Semitism allowed on my channel at all. And I'm just really glad to hear the queer Marxists say that they're not against Jewish people. They don't care if people are Jewish. They care if people are Zionists. Because Israel, to the left, are the settler colonists. They are the private property owners. They are the bourgeois. They are the colonizers. They stole the land from the Palestinian people. The Palestinians are the proletariat, the oppressed. They are uprising against their evil capitalist oppressors in a decolonization effort. The left isn't on Palestine's side because they're Muslim. They're on their side because Israel is the capitalist, and the left will always and forever be on the side of the anti-capitalist. And in this scenario, whether or not it's true, it doesn't matter. In this scenario, the Palestinians represent the anti-capitalist uprising. That's what Queers for Palestine means. This is a queer Marxist podcast that we're listening to right now. That's what Queers for Palestine means. Queer is an anti-capitalist, anti-assimilationist movement. They are in solidarity with the Palestinians who are in an anti-capitalist movement according to the left. They are decolonizing the land. They are taking it back from the settler colonist oppressors. That is Israel. That is what the issue is. And I just want to point that out because I don't want any accusations of anti-Semitism. The Queer podcast literally said, and we'll go back and listen to it again. We're going to listen to this whole clip again, just so people really understand it. What the podcast just said is gay isn't the same as Zionist, just like Jewish isn't the same as Zionist. Their problem is not with Jewish people. Their problem is with Israel, Zionist, settler colonialism. Just listen to this part again.
Claiming to provide that. And so it would be very seductive to many gays and lesbians to sort of link their subjectivity to that nation building project, as many have done. However, I think it's actually deeply misguided to assume that tethering gay subjectivity to the powers of a Zionist state makes gays and lesbians around the world safer. I mean, even from a self-interested point of view, and I don't actually think that a transactional form of politics is what we should be going for. But even if that were what we were going for, we would want to oppose the conflation of gay and Zionism, just like we'd want to oppose the conflation of Jewishness and Zionism, because that doesn't make Jewish people safe. I don't think it's good for gays to be associated with a genocidal regime. I don't think that makes gay people safer across the world. And yet that's what the nation would want us to believe. I think gay people have a choice. They can opt for identification with a fascist genocidal ethno-state, or they can opt for identification with people struggling for freedom the world over. And they do have a contradictory position there, but we need to opt for the latter, for the desires that come with solidarity with people who live somewhere far away, rather than hitching ourselves to the state. Because that's what happened
Queers for
that's
Palestine.
what happened when gay people started putting their energies into securing recognition and rights from the US or the UK state for marriage or for adoption or for the right to be in the military or whatever. It created a form of gay subjectivity here that was deeply, deeply impoverished.
I mean, one of the best things about, the things I appreciate most about your book is the way it challenges a history.
I really like this guy. This guy is like the male Sophie. This guy is explaining stuff in plain English. This guy he's actually being really effing clear with what he believes, which is not usual for queer Marxists at all. We need to listen to more from this guy. This guy's going to be, maybe this will be my new internet boyfriend. Did we just find my new internet boyfriend? See, this is perfect. I don't want an internet boyfriend that I have to talk to and interact with. That's inevitably going to go south when they do something stupid. I need an internet boyfriend that is completely my ideological opposite, that I keep at a safe distance, just like with Sophie. I don't talk to Sophie. Sophie hates me. Actually, I think Sophie secretly loves me too. I think she does. Sophie and I are both Aries women, and Sophie believes in this stuff. I know you do, Sophie. So I think that Sophie has like we have an unspoken respect for each other because we're both Aries women, and Sophie knows I'm right about a lot of things, and Sophie is this close to figuring out the JQ. It's not even funny. But Sophie and I are not in solidarity. We are not best friends. We are not comrades in any way. Sophie cannot appear to be in solidarity with me. I understand. We are on opposite teams. But Sophie is still going to be my internet girlfriend, whether Sophie likes that or not. And I think that Sophie should take this as an opportunity to play with the oppressive dynamics of capitalism, because I'm just saying, Sophie, we're in an internet relationship. That's just the way it goes, okay? You need someone else to take the lead. Fine, I'll do it. We're in an internet relationship now. It's just the way it goes. But maybe this guy, Alexander Stoffel, maybe this guy could be the internet boyfriend because he's explaining things very clearly. He seems relatively young-ish, so that's kind of interesting. I don't know what he looks like, but his voice sounds relatively young. Good find.
History of gay liberation struggles, which are going to be sort of somewhat crude, but it's because it's an image that most people will understand. It's the X-Men model of gay liberation struggles. The Magneto versus Professor X, the assimilation.
And truth be told, I feel like I know his name. I feel like I've seen him before, but it's clicking differently listening to this. So,
or the separatism. And one of the best things about the book is, you highlight that this history it doesn't work. It's not really a divide, because methodologically, if you're being a separatist, you're still modeling on.
Can I please convince Sophie and this guy to do a podcast with me called Problematic Thruple? No, I'm being serious. Can you imagine? What do you think it would take to convince Sophie and this guy at the same time to do a podcast with me called Problematic Thruple? That is just such a brilliant name for a podcast. This is like one of those things. Or if they won't do it because they're being obstinate and lame, then who else can we get to do it? Because Problematic Thruple, I need 2 people that I will not be in an internet relationship with in real life. I need 2 people to do a podcast with called Problematic Thruple. Once you have a great name like that, it's like, there's just like, you have to create something out of it. Let's all think on that, okay? Play.
Nation, and and if you're being an assimilationist, still modeling on a nation, you're just modeling on different nations, but the form is precisely the same.
Yo! Wait, this is actually... That's actually not the worst idea. Oh, he is young. Mizakan just sent me a video of him. He is young. He looks Jewish, too. He does look Jewish. He's adorable, though. I would be in a problematic throuple with him. I would also be in a problematic throuple with Brittany and Mio. I don't think Mio got some sort of job where allegedly he has less time, but he's still creating as much content. So I don't know how he has less time, but Mio allegedly got a job or something. So I don't know if we could do that, but
the best example, they are all examples from Mio, is in the case of the black lesbian feminist movement of the 1970s, which as well, you very much broaden out by drawing on scholarship that highlights that some of the groups that we typically hold up as almost like exceptions within this realm, like the Combahee River Collective, are actually part of a more broader and diffuse critique that is coming about at the same time as various sort of sociological reports are perpetuating a kind of myth that that black households are by some sort of nature matriarchal. And in response to this, you pick up the arguments of the black lesbian feminist movements of the 70s. And one of the main points you highlight, I just want to quote it here because it just really lays out the field, which is, quote, "Black lesbian feminists aimed to undermine the notion that there is a private sphere that concerns sexuality that exists separately from, logically prior to, or outside of the history of Western imperialism."
What?
Going back to what you were saying about Marx and the division between the political and the private sphere, which is a division which can only appear under certain material and economic conditions. So I just wanted to ask, how did various black feminist movements in the 70s take this fundamental theoretical point and develop it not simply in terms of theory, but also in terms of their wider internationalist organizing, or at least an organizing that pushed beyond the boundaries of a nationalist model of social liberation or integration?
Yeah, the Black lesbian feminist movement really actually radicalized the critiques of the gay liberationists, their critiques of heteronormativity. So the famous Black feminists like Audre Lorde, were using the term erotic as well. And there are clear resonances between her use of the term erotic and the gay liberationist use of the term erotic. Of course, she wasn't concerned with Freudian notions of a polymorphous or innate bisexuality, but she also conceived of the erotic as a creative force that is devalued within advanced capitalist societies and therefore has the potential to animate radical politics and animate solidarity with other groups. And so, as you mentioned, this movement emerged at a time when powerful discourses about the Black matriarchy were circulating, and this was a myth that was popularized by the Harvard sociologist David Patrick Moynihan. I think this is who you had in mind, Adam. And it essentially claimed that the high rate of single mother-led households were the reason for the persistence of poverty and crime within Black communities.
True.
The claim was that if Black men were installed as proper providers and as heads of their households, basically, if the heteropatriarchal nuclear family was reinstated within the Black community, then those social defects would somehow be overcome.
Okay, check
the
this out. This literally just occurred to me, but it's absolutely the truth based on what he just said. So I've oftentimes struggled with the question of, are Black families considered to be nuclear families? Because the left does this thing sometimes with groups where they basically make these broad generalizations, and they love to do this with Black people. So, for example, they pretty much believe that all Black people are like obligated to be socialists because of slavery. Slavery being, of course, the manifestation of capitalism in the form of private property ownership of people. So slavery created systemic racism. And because of that, socialists usually kind of just make this leap in their head where they're like, oh yeah, all Black people should be socialists. This is why Larry Elder was called the black face of white supremacy, because Larry Elder is not a socialist. This is why Enrique Tarrio was talked about in NPR or the Washington Post. I think it was the Washington Post, actually, as having multiracial whiteness. Enrique Tarrio, what is he? Afro-Cuban? He is not white. But they accused him of multiracial whiteness because whiteness is not about skin color. Whiteness is about the system that upholds racism. The system is capitalism. That's what they mean when they say systemic racism. And so if you are a Black person and you're not a socialist, you're not considered to be Black. Also, consider that they burned down like all these Black-owned businesses in Minneapolis during the Black Lives Matter riots. And now we know, because of the George Floyd anniversary that just happened, now we know that some of those Black-owned businesses didn't even get any of the George Floyd Foundation money. Because why would they? So I've always struggled with this idea of like, do Black people actually have a nuclear family? Are Black families considered to be nuclear families? Because in all the listening that we've done, it kind of seems like they're very dismissive of the idea of a Black nuclear family. They don't really talk about it. It's always about they always just kind of leave that out, right? Here is the epiphany that I've just had based on this podcast. Are you guys ready for the epiphany? And some of you may have got there already, but this is the epiphany that I just had. The argument that the left would make. Oh shit, this is so fucking racist. Unironically, what I'm about to say is actually racist, but it's not my idea. I'm explaining what I think the left actually believes, all right? Are you guys ready? The left believes that because the majority of Black households are single-parent households, because Black fathers don't stick around so typically, if the Black father is not in the household, then that is not considered to be a capitalist nuclear family, because the core of the capitalist nuclear family is the propertied relationship of marriage between two people. And if the Black father is not there, then that is not a propertied relation sanctioned by the state. And therefore, ergo, because it's a single mother, because the Black fathers leave, that means that Black people do not have a nuclear family. And therefore, Black people, because of the absence of the father, so predictably, are disrupting the capitalist social reproduction via the nuclear family. I'm pretty sure that's what they believe. Based on what he just said, they're like, Black people can't have nuclear families because they don't have monogamous two-person relationships because the fathers leave. So it's unintentionally a very racist position. It's unintentionally a very racist position to have, to try to explain why capitalism is oppressive of Black people. Can we listen to that part again? That was great.
I think this is who you had in mind, Adam. And it essentially claimed that the high rate of single mother-led households were the reason for the persistence of poverty and crime within Black communities. The claim was that if Black
They're
men
outside of
were
capitalism.
installed as proper providers and as heads of their households, basically, if the heteropatriarchal nuclear family was reinstated within the Black community, then those
That means the nuclear family does not exist within the Black community. He just said if the heteropatriarchal nuclear family was reinstated in the Black community, that means this podcast was recorded like a couple weeks ago. That means they believe that the nuclear family does not exist in the Black community. Not even the nuclear family. We actually hang on. It's even better than that. They're calling it the heteropatriarchal nuclear family. You can see it on the screen. What does heteropatriarchal mean? It means the father is in the household as the head of the household. That's what the patriarchy is. It's the gender hierarchy in which the man is on top. They're saying that Black families don't have heteropatriarchal nuclear families because the father isn't there. And it hasn't been yet reinstated. So they're outside the parameters of the nuclear family. This is fun. I know, like, I'm not getting any feedback in the chat. I just want to know, like, do other people find this as funny as I do? That the left, like, is actually making a severely racist argument in order to explain systemic racism, which has nothing to do with skin color. And they're actually making an extremely racist argument to say that Black families are not nuclear families because most of the fathers don't stick around. It is funny. I don't care what anyone says. It's funny, not in a racist way. I don't agree with the argument. I'm just trying to explain what the argument is.
Nuclear family was reinstated within the Black community, then those social defects would somehow be overcome. And the Black feminists flat out rejected that diagnosis, that pathologization of Black families, and they refused to allow it to renaturalize the heteropatriarchal family model. And what they used this to show was that it wasn't just homosexuals that were seen as deviant. The Black family was also treated as an aberration to the same heteronormative ideals of family life. So Black people were also being excluded from the prescriptions of heteronormativity.
Yep.
And that tied Blackness to a form of domination that was also being experienced by homosexuals and tied the Black feminist movement to struggles for sexual liberation. But it also shed light on some of the limitations of the gay liberationists' analysis of heteronormativity, at least insofar as it failed to account for how imbricated heteronormativity was with forms of racial domination. So the Black lesbian feminists were identifying the white supremacist roots of heteronormativity, and they were placing the state's regulation of non-heteronormative families within a history of racism. But importantly, that history for them was a long history of Western imperialism and colonial violence. So they saw heteronormativity as itself a colonial imposition that was used to destroy non-Western ways of being. For them, the
heteronormativity just means the norms that uphold capitalism, by the way. In this case, again, it's like the nuclear family, the monogamous two-person relationship. That relationship could be between a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. If it's between a gay or lesbian relationship, it's going to be called a homonormative relationship, but it's still a normative relationship. We don't care about the hetero, we don't care about the homo, because in this case, they both mean the same thing, unironically. They mean not queer. Hetero means not queer. Homonormative means not queer. I guess we could say heteronormative. Heteronormative means not queer. Homonormative also means not queer. They mean the same thing. Don't let the hetero or homo confuse you.
Destruction of pre-colonial gender and sexual structures was the basis for the advancement of Western civilization. And so the sexual oppression to which Black women in the US were subjected was part of a global system of capitalist imperialism. They were already saying this in the 70s. This has since been backed up and sort of further developed by lots of Black feminist scholarship in the last 2-3 decades. One essay that I really like that does this well is Frances Beale's essay, Double Jeopardy, which I talk about in the book. That essay identifies the colonial roots of surgical violence against Black women in the US. And Frances Beale is arguing in that essay that sites of colonial occupation served as a sort of experimental lab for medical research, which is then imported and used back at home. And she does that by uncovering the US state's history of sponsoring forced sterilizations in places like the Third World. So the analysis begins with really staggering statistics about the rates of forcible surgical sterilization in places like India and I believe Puerto Rico, only then turning to the effects of those methods once they were imported within the US itself. So what the essay is trying to do is it's trying to clarify the link between US imperialism and the violence that Black women are experiencing at home at the hands of the medical establishment, seen in things like the rates of childbearing deaths and forced hysterectomies and lack of access to safe abortions and so on. But if in their analysis, racialized sexual oppression was constituted through colonization, then it also followed that for these feminists, the liberation of Black women would only be achieved through anti-colonial struggle as well. So in 1970, Toni Cade Bambra wrote an essay in which she draws inspiration from Frantz Fanon's description of the Algerian liberation struggle and how it undid traditional and constraining ways of life. He writes about this in the book.
Has anyone here actually read Frantz Fanon? I'd be interested to know. I have a question if you have.
Colonialism. And that was a text that was used by the Black feminists to argue that anti-imperialist struggle would enable people to free themselves from the heteronormative family. But in my book, I actually try to argue that all of these Black feminist analyses were indebted to a tradition of anti-imperialism that could be traced back to people like Lenin and Du Bois, especially their interest in the ways that imperialism divides the proletariat in imperialist states. So Lenin, of course, famously argued that imperialism creates an opportunity for the bourgeoisie to bribe the upper section of the working class in the metropole, which he called the labor aristocracy. And Du Bois famously argued that the global color line had led to a racial fragmentation of the US working class. So he understood the white working class's embrace of nationalism and militarism during the First World War to be inseparable from the expanding empire of the US. And so the implication here was that if white workers had instead focused on building interracial
Rottweiler, do you remember this might actually be a perfect question for you, because you used to follow James Lindsay and you used to kind of tell me what he was saying. Do you remember when James originally analyzed Fanon? And he made this big deal about it's about like violence and violence and violence for decolonization, yada, yada, yada. Was that true? Do you know if he actually said that? Because it's like, I feel like it made sense to me at the time, but I also feel like so much of what James has done has turned out to be bullshit that I feel like I cannot even trust anything that I learned from him back in the day when I thought he was still hinged into reality. I have to fucking reverse engineer everything now. So do you have any recollection of whether or not you agreed with his analysis on that?
Tarian solidarity, they could have created alliances with African and Asian nations that could have then mounted a resistance to Western imperialism. So one of the really remarkable applications of that anti-imperialist approach I found in this Black feminist...
Well, this podcast is a lot less sexy than I expected. Queer Marxism, ironically, is very rarely sexy. This is what I keep trying to explain to you guys. You guys keep saying it's about sexualizing kids. It's about sexualizing kids. It's not actually about sexualizing kids at all. It never has been. So I'm not saying sexualizing kids doesn't happen, but it doesn't come from this. And the reason I say that is even though these people talk about sex, they aren't actually very sexual. Their content, even when you think it's going to be spicy, is usually more about feelings and emotions and politics and allegory and all this stuff. So it's like, when you finally listen to them, you realize that it's really not as sexual as you think it is. And there's a reason for that, because James Lindsay lied to millions of people about what queer theory is. And now the entire public is completely misinformed about what queer theory is. And that's why we have to do these exercises of spending an entire month listening to this stuff live on the internet, to hopefully get some people to see it's not actually what you think it is. It's actually way worse than you think it is. Because if it were just about sex, that would be one thing. This is about the very structures that uphold society. This is about teaching kids that gender isn't real. This is about dissolving the nuclear family. Like, this is about destroying the American dream. It's about literally fucking up every single part of our society. But no, the entire right had to be distracted by grooming, when if they'd actually just listened to what these people say, they're going to find out it's actually really not that sexual. So, yeah. Unironically, yeah.
Pamphlet called Lessons from the Damned, which was published in 1973. And the anonymous authors of that essay detail the post-war emergence of what they call a black petit bourgeoisie in the US. And it's described as a class that imitates the white bourgeoisie. And they see this as fracturing the material basis for solidarity amongst Black Americans. And just as Lenin was warning of the labor aristocracy's influence within the working class movement, these authors were also warning against the power of the black petit bourgeoisie within the Black movement. And then that tradition of anti-imperialist theorizing continues. I then found it within the Black lesbian feminism of the late 70s into the early 80s. I think that at the heart of many of Audre Lorde's writings on US imperialism in places like Grenada, which she wrote quite a lot about, was the insight that the privileges that citizenship bestows upon Black Americans can lead them to disidentify with the Black subjects of US empire abroad, but that it also should compel them to resist US imperialism. So Lorde's famous writings on reflexivity are actually primarily concerned with the contradictory position of Black Americans under imperialism.
Okay, Rottweiler says, so yeah, back when Lindsay analyzed Fanon, in passing, he was correct because he wasn't insane yet. Okay, I thought so. I thought that was the pre-insanity period. You're right. Listen, regardless of what you think of James now, and James is insane and unhinged and a retard and every bad thing, and he is so destructive, it's unbelievable. And we are never going to be able to undo the damage that James Lindsay is doing right now. There was a time when James was actually pretty fucking great. There was a time. And then Twitter spoiled him. Twitter ruined everything. But his work actually used to be good. And we shouldn't shit on someone's past good work just because they lost their fucking mind.
And many of her poems, some of which I read in the book, are appeals to her readers to interrogate their complicities with US empire and are meant as an incitement to greater solidarity and identification with the victims of imperialism. So for her, the cultivation of anti-imperialist solidarity meant wrestling with that contradictory position of people as both conditional beneficiaries of imperialism, but also victims of imperialism. And that is how I arrive at that claim that the Black lesbian feminists rejected the notion that there is a private sphere that somehow concerns sexuality, which is outside of the history of imperialism. I think the central lesson of the Black lesbian feminist movement was to show that if anti-imperialism doesn't take sexual politics into account, anti-imperialists risk committing a form of reductionism that imagines the transition from capitalism to socialism as an economic or political transition that would...
So what did they just say? If you don't take sexual politics into account, then you're just talking about the political or economic transition of capitalism, not the cultural model. Listen again. Queer Marxism is about the cultural model of capitalism. They very rarely talk about the economic model of capitalism, although it does kind of blend in here and there. It's like, one of the arguments they make about motherhood is not only do women have to do the unpaid labor of raising the kids in the nuclear family, they also have to engage in capitalism and have a job on top of that to be able to feed their family and stuff like that. So I'm not saying they never talk about the economic model of capitalism, but they're primarily focused on the cultural model. And that's why it's really important that we understand that the economic model of capitalism is distinct from the cultural model, and that both of them are important to the left, but queer Marxism is primarily focused on the cultural model.
Doesn't take sexual politics into account. Anti-imperialists risk committing a form of reductionism that imagines the transition from capitalism to socialism as an economic or political transition. A transition that would leave the institutions of the family and sexuality and gender intact. What Black lesbian feminists show us is that a post-imperialist world order would entail a transformation of sexual relations. And here again, the contribution of the movement to the wider anti-imperialist struggles, as was the case with the gay liberation movement, was really to enjoin their comrades to reflect on the ways that US imperialism was entwined with racialized sexual oppression, and was to accordingly radicalize anti-imperialist struggle. And then this really informed the activities of the Black lesbian feminists, their travels, the associations, their art, their poems. Everything is infused with this attempt to use the erotic as a way of forging new forms of solidarity with subjects, both at home and abroad.
Oh yeah,
that's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, I think they are probably, one of the most fervent examples of challenging us with the complicit, basically giving us a framework to analyze how we can even do this in imperial core. When it becomes such an issue of if everything we are doing is simply part of the reproductive and even the productive process of the imperial.
Hang on. We got a super chat from Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne. Are the women being paid for their otherwise unpaid child labor through welfare in Section 8? No, I don't. Well, okay, maybe in Black families, but remember, Black families are not considered to be nuclear families, right? No, they don't see it that way, Suzanne. I've never heard them talk about that specifically. I don't get the impression that most of the people that we track are on welfare or in like Section 8 housing. Maybe they are, but I don't get that impression. So it's an interesting question, though. I appreciate the super chat. Oh. Is that this utopia? Oh, you're making a racist joke about the left's racist beliefs. With love, of course. With love and appreciation, no racism allowed. Suzanne, come on. Suzanne making a racist joke. What a time to be alive. I say this with love, Suzanne. I appreciate you. Thank you.
System, because we are
my
in the
chat
imperial
is making
hegemon.
Racist jokes.
It is very hard to think beyond it, and without doing a history like yours, we don't really. It's too easy to fall into the temptation of nationalism. Mm-hmm. I have had my fair few conversations with queer comrades, and occasionally they just get so just riled up, and I remember had about a couple weeks like, well, why don't we just like make our own place? And I'm like, no, this is gay Israel. No, fake comrades. we have to think beyond the nationalist model. And I think as we see this today, as I've mentioned earlier, groups like Queer for Palestine, whenever you go to like a Palestinian solidarity march, queer activists are often at the front and center of this. Is organizers. I mean, as our experience was, our own org RS21. This is lived experience here. Whereas the old, dusty, sort of quite nationalist Marxists, social democrats with Lenin busts on their windows or something like that, when they sort of try to resurrect the old social democracy, you can really see where, in a way, you get such transphobic Marxist groups like the Communist Party of Britain and them just advocating for a reinvigoration of the national social democratic welfare system, which itself is completely ahistorical because it relates to an earlier period of British Empire. And so I think this book arrives at a very opportune time for ongoing social movement.
They're shitting on the non-queer
Marxists. Just to inform them, but in ways recording repetitions of movements away from the national project that we're seeing even today. But overall, just to kind of round off, I mean, what lessons do you think that we should learn from groups like, the Gay Liberation Front, the Black
question.
Lesbian Feminist Collectives, AIDS activist groups such as ACT UP in our contemporary organizing today? Or where do you see that lineage continuing? Because I guess for some people, the lineage is already continuing, and for some, we maybe need to catch up with the victories and the developments of the past.
Well, first of all, I'm just going to say real quick to this thing about the presence of queer people in Palestine activism. This is actually one of the things that initially animated me to write this book, which is that when I was doing student activism around Palestine, like I would say 60% of the students were queer. And I always wondered what is it about queerness that creates an orientation to the world that makes solidarity with the Palestinians seem urgent. I'm not actually sure that I found an answer in the book, but perhaps something about the forms of desires outside of the nation form provide an answer. And yeah, anyway, to your question, I think there are so many parallels between the conditions that the movements that I studied faced and then recent developments in our own context today. There are really too many to list. And when I watch the news, I just have flashbacks to things that I was researching. I mean, I can give a couple of examples, like actually, when it comes to Israel, my book talks about AIDS activist groups in the Bay Area that were planning actions in solidarity with Central American national liberation struggles. And those included actions to block...
Hang on, we got a super chat from Rottweiler. One must be mindful when reading Fanon that because at first glance it seems post-colonial theory is race-based, but he uses terms as white and black identities. We know it isn't about race. Well, Rottweiler, and I appreciate the super chat. Thank you. I mean, I always think back to we saw the Denver communists say this, right? That when they say white, they mean people who didn't work in the sun. Black were people who worked in the sun. So it's like they're saying the owners did not work in the sun. The bourgeois, the capitalist, didn't work in the sun. That's how the term got quote unquote invented. Whereas the black, the oppressed, the proletariat, the property owned, they were the ones that worked in the sun. And so when you're hearing people say, and this is really important to be mindful of, like when you're listening to Marxism, right, is like you always have to be mindful that the vast majority of the time, especially with American Marxism, when they say white, they are talking about the capitalist. When they say black, they're talking about the proletariat, the oppressed, the bourgeois and the proletariat. There are some exceptions to this. Like every once in a blue moon, they are actually talking about white skin color, but you have to listen very closely for context with that. Like, for example, I do think the DC shooter that shot those two like Israelis outside of the Jewish museum, I do think he actually hated white people. I've looked at the text messages. I do think when he was saying white, he was actually saying skin color. He was a crazy person, though, and we can acknowledge that he might have been talking about skin color, but he was also a crazy person, and crazy people shouldn't be representative of what highly organized cults believe, because he is one person. It didn't even really seem like he was that involved. The last time he was involved in these far leftist groups, it seemed to me was like in 2018 or something like that. So we can't say he's an opinion leader and a driver of the movement, right? Same with like the South African stuff. The South African stuff is actually about white skin color. But in America, most of the time, it is about systemic racism or capitalism. No, this usually doesn't happen. It's only conservatives who thinks this happens a lot. The left, by and large, knows what their language means. Conservatives do not know what the language means, which is why conservatives always confuse it. But you can never account for crazy people. You just can't. It's like... It also kind of seemed like he specifically was on the left because of the Free Palestine movement, which is also kind of like it's like people who are socialists because they're sex workers. They're not really aligned with a lot of like the real far left activists, but the far left activists will, champion their causes, and so they go along with it. Yeah, I think it's he shot 2 people in cold blood. I'm gonna say that's pretty fucking crazy. That's not a sane thing to do.
Arms shipments from, for example, the US to El Salvador during the Reagan administration. Of course, comparable with attempts today to block arms shipments to Israel. But those AIDS activist groups, they were facing down US administrations that were refusing to share AIDS prevention materials, imposing bans on HIV positive migrants, introducing trade policies that restricted the procurement of AIDS medication in sub-Saharan Africa.
Hang on. Why do leftists in Ireland want to import infinitely Africans? And I don't know the answer to that, Billy. I don't study leftism in other countries. Mostly, every once in a while, we might watch something from Canada or the UK or something like that. But I don't know the answer to that. I would have to, go if you actually want to know the answer to this, go listen to leftist groups out of Ireland. I'm sure if you like Google or ChatGPT it, you'll be able to find a list of like leftist groups in Ireland. Go find their content. Go find where they're talking about it online. Go listen to what they have to say. Go ask them. You might just be able to like literally ask them and they'll tell you, The left doesn't keep a lot of this stuff a secret. They will if you actually just ask them, and they hate me, they're not going to do it for me. But if you're just like a person and you just ask them, chances are you might actually get an answer.
Africa, all within the context of US war in the Middle East during the first Gulf War. And then, of course, within the first week of taking office, the Trump administration temporarily took down federal web pages that contained HIV/AIDS prevention information. They prohibited organizations in sub-Saharan Africa from distributing AIDS medication that had been procured using US foreign aid. Of course, announced its program. The administration announced its program of mass deportation. Again, all of this is occurring within the context of the war in the Middle East. And those are just the parallels to the AIDS activist movement. I won't even go over the ones with the other movements. But it's kind of, what are the lessons and what does it teach us is a bit of a difficult question, because the movements in the book experimented with so many different kinds of organizational forms and direct action tactics and political strategies. And I think that organizers today are learning from and building on those political traditions in all sorts of ways. I know that queer and trans activists, what I've seen is that queer and trans activists have been repurposing some of the ACT UP slogans, like the silence equals death slogan, in their protests against the genocide. But of course, all of those movements will build on those traditions according to various local considerations of planning and strategy and what will be effective and so on. So I'd be hesitant to speak in sort of general terms about what lessons or strategies can be adopted today. But what I hope that my book would convince readers of is the need for a historically situated diagnosis of the present. So in North America and in Western Europe, we are seeing bans on gender-affirming care for trans kids. We're seeing restrictions on LGBTI inclusive education in schools. We're seeing a resurgence of all sorts of conspiracy theories about grooming and pedophilia,
Ooh.
whether that's being done supposedly by school librarians or drag queens or liberal elites. There is this widespread moral panic over the breakdown of traditional modes of reproduction, biological and social reproduction.
Bing.
And so in order to ensure the future of the nation, the white nation, we're seeing a really rapid renaturalization of white supremacist and patriarchal ideals. Race science and eugenics is back. Trad wives are in. We're really entering a sort of mask-off present where the forms of desire that are now attached to the nation are becoming more openly fascistic. And
totally, bro.
People in the administration, people like RFK and others, are currently colonizing a lot of the issues in bad faith that should be part of a left-wing program. Things like critiques of the power of the pharmaceutical industry.
Wait. RFK is talking about issues that leftists feel are rightfully theirs. And so leftists are like, RFK is stealing our issues and colonizing it and privatizing it for fascism under the oppressive force of capitalism. It's not that he can't be happy. Like, hey, guys, RFK is talking about our ideas. Isn't that kind of a cool thing? He has to be like, RFK colonized our ideas. He literally stole our ideas. These were our collective ideas. Those ideas were under our collective care, just like they do with the land. And you stole our ideas from us, and then you privatized them by implementing them in a Trump fascistic capitalist bourgeois White House. Again, with the RFK colonized us?
We're really entering a sort of mask-off present where the forms of desire that are now attached to the nation are becoming more openly fascistic. And people in the administration, people like RFK and others, are currently colonizing a lot of the issues in bad faith that should be part of a left-wing program. Things like critiques of the power of the pharmaceutical industry, issues to do with health and nutrition, widespread feelings of loneliness and alienation. These are all issues that speak to our human needs, wants, and desires for love and intimacy and well-being and health and sex and rest and connection. These are exactly those intimate areas of our lives that the gay liberationists and the Black lesbian feminists and the AIDS activists were envisioning emancipated futures for. And in the past, this is one of the lessons of the book, is that in the past, the left often made the mistake of treating those aspects of our lives as secondary, or worse, as sort of bourgeois deviations. And we would do so again at our own peril. The left needs a vision of human flourishing and fulfillment and bodily self-determination. And I think it's actually the trans feminist movement today that is arguably offering us some of the most revolutionary ones. I mean, no wonder then that the trans movement would become the focal point of the far right. But
I wouldn't say that's true, but okay, whatever.
The key lesson then is from the book, and sorry, I'll end there, is that that movement has to be anti-capitalist. Just really simply, capitalism isn't a system that works to fulfill human needs. It's a system that works to produce profit. And that really couldn't be more clear than it is today. Post-industrial societies like the UK and the US are currently facing a huge care crisis. The demand for care is increasing, but there's also been a systematic failure to sustain all of the reproductive infrastructures and labor at levels that can meet the care needs of people, especially of children and of the elderly and of people with disabilities. And the source of that crisis is, of course, capital's own devaluation of unproductive activities or low productivity activities, which include the care work that makes up the large proportion of our growing service sector. Our enemies at the moment are claiming that trans people and all of their woke allies are threatening the nation. But what is actually happening is that we live under a system that subordinates unproductive to productive activity at all cost, even if this means rendering entire populations surplus and leaving them to die. And so we need a critique of capitalism. We need a critique of the ways that it devalues reproductive work and leaves so many without an adequate provision of care, so that we don't end up blaming those problems on the most vulnerable communities in our society and then investing capitalist states with even more powers to wield against them, which is the current program of current ruling elites.
Absolutely. And listeners, if you are in the UK, you can hear Alex speak at the Festival of the Oppressed in London from the 21st and 22nd of June 2025, hosted by. I'm not assuming this podcast into RS21. This is just a plug that just works. So don't worry, Craig, and don't worry, Will, if you're listening. This is not a post Trotskyite takeover, because I am not a trot. But you can hear Alex talk at Festival for the Oppressed 2021. Do you have any other talks coming up? Any publications? Where can people find your work? I mean, obviously the book.
What is the Festival of the Oppressed? What is that? Can we look that up? Festival of the Oppressed
is out now at Stanford University Press. But where else can people find out what you're doing? Do we have anyone
in London that can go?
The book is out. I will be at, I think the RS21 Festival will be great fun. And I'm doing a talk in a week and a half with Jules Gleason that will be online.
We missed that. And I'm upset about it.
Live on the Historical Materialism YouTube channel. Jules just has a book out called Hermaphrodite Logic about the intersex liberation movement. So we'll be talking about queer, trans, and intersex liberation histories. I think that'll be great too.
Listeners, we're going to listen to that. Then you can come listen to Jules' appearance on Acid Horizon after, where we will be talking about intersex logic. And indeed, coming up in early June, Jules will also be doing a talk with Billy Cashmore at Houseman's Books, our favourite London hall.
Houseman's Books, we've tracked them before too.
That's expanded plug universe there. But I guess there's nothing else to say. But
all right, that's it. That was actually really great. And it makes me really look forward to checking out more of this YouTube channel, because this YouTube channel has a ton of content. And I know I yelled a little bit early on, but we got it back together. The chat always calms down after I yell at someone. I do genuinely hope the person that I yelled at comes back. I actually really do. I'm not being facetious about that, but I'm not unbanning their second account that they came on here with, because they need to learn a lesson from that. But I hope they come back and they continue to learn. But there's a lot more content on this YouTube channel. Now let's see. Historical materialism. Hang on. Historical materialism. The historical material. You all were being retarded. Okay, Patrick. You all forgot. Reagan, this is what happens. Reagan, do you know what happened when you left for 15 minutes? Everyone in the chat forgot that the United States Constitution is grounded in capitalism. And I kept trying to get him to say it. I was like, listen to the question I'm asking. They're talking about the United States system. And people were like, the patriarchy? I was like, shut the fuck up. Yeah, you all deserve to get yelled at, Patrick. Okay? You did. You deserve to get yelled at. You were yelling capitalism while trying. You're like the one fucking time that you can say capitalism, and you assholes don't say capitalism. I also want to say too, I saw a couple people come in. Hang on. I just want to say thank you, Zachary. And then someone else came late and apologized too. I feel like there was a Tolkien fan. I just want to say, you guys don't have to apologize for showing up late to the stream. You don't ever have to. It's fine. You can come in and out. It's fine. Anyway, let's look at this historical materialism YouTube channel. Where is it? What historical materialism YouTube channel are they talking about? Hang on. What is that kid's name? Let me search that kid's name. Alexander Stoffel. He's very cute. He's very nerdy. Alexander Stoffel. This one. I thought so. Okay. Wow. Okay. Hang on. There he is. He's so cute. Yeah, Mizakin, you said this one earlier. Save for later. We'll watch that later. Listen, this channel has been kind of on my radar for a while, but we've never watched something on this channel, but we probably should. I recognize them because their thumbnails are just so clean and well branded. But I've known about this channel for a while. Okay, cool. Right on. Now, I want to remind everyone, tomorrow is going to be a big day. Okay? if you were not here at the beginning of the stream, I'm going to tell you what we're watching tomorrow so that you can prepare yourself. Mizakan is really going to appreciate this, I think, more than anyone. Maybe, I don't know, maybe not, I don't know. So tomorrow, we're watching fat studies. We are watching fat liberation as shared liberation. And we're not just watching fat studies. We're watching fat studies from the Radical Public Health Group at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And we are watching fat studies from a scholar activist of fat studies, abolition, and racial capitalism, and a PhD student in the Gender and Women's Studies program. And it's going to be really great. And it's going to be really hard. And it's going to be basically like boot camp. And some of you are going to cry. And it's going to be awesome. We don't get fat studies presentations like this every day. And I just need you all to prepare yourself. I need you to build up the mental stamina that is required to dig deep, no pun intended, into the wacky world of fat studies. And has anyone never seen a fat studies presentation? One in the chat if you are brand new to fat studies and you've never actually watched a full fat studies presentation. 2 in the chat if you've watched fat studies and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So 1 in the chat if you are completely new to fat studies and this will be your first experience. 2 in the chat if you are already mentally preparing yourself for the horrors that we are going to undergo together. We're going to support each other through this, okay? See, I got a mix of 1s and 2s. We got some 1s, we got some 2s. The 2s will be able to tell, the 2s are going to have to take care of the 1s tomorrow. The 1s are going to be the ones crying in the corner, and they're going to be very upset, and they're not going to know what to do. But you have to trust me. It's going to be awesome, okay? Anyway, I have another show in about half an hour. Jennifer and I are going to come back at 9 p.m. and we're going to talk about chakras, and we're not going to talk about fat studies, and we're not going to talk about queer Marxism, and we're not going to talk about politics, and we're not going to talk about news. We're going to come back at 9 p.m. and talk about chakras and spirituality and energy and all that good stuff. And so I'm going to end this stream. I'm going to go get some dinner, and I'll be back in half an hour. All right. All right. We will do queer Marxism again tomorrow. We are doing fat studies tomorrow. And you guys are all going to thank me when it's over. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Would you give me some idea?
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that? piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.